The text message from Jessica flashed on my phone at 2:17 a.m. Emma, I need to know if Ryan's been contacting anyone. Please check his things when he's not around. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I stared at my phone in the darkness of my bedroom. My husband, Mark, sleeping peacefully beside me, completely unaware that his brother's estranged wife was asking me to spy on him. What Jessica didn't understand was that I'd already found something in Ryan's room. Something that had left Mark completely speechless when I showed him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months earlier, I was preparing Sunday dinner when Mark came into the kitchen with that look on his face, the one that said he was about to ask for a favor he knew I wouldn't like. Emma, he started, leaning against our kitchen island. Ryan called. He and Jessica are taking some time apart. I set down the knife I was using to chop vegetables and took a deep breath. Ryan and Jessica's marriage had been rocky for years, with dramatic fights followed by passionate reconciliations. The cycle was exhausting, even from a distance. How long this time? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mark and I had been married for 15 years, and I'd learned that family loyalty ran deep with the Taylors. Mark hesitated, avoiding my eyes. He needs a place to stay. Just for a week, 2 tops, until he figures things out. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel. Our modest 4-bedroom home in Oakwood Heights was comfortable but not spacious. With our teenage son Daniel and 8-year-old daughter Sarah, plus my home office where I prepared lectures for my part-time teaching position at Riverside Community College, space was already at a premium. Mark, you know I love your brother, but the last time he stayed with us— I know, Mark interrupted, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. But he's really trying this time. He's been sober for 3 months. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller. Ryan's drinking had been a constant source of tension in his marriage, and during his last visit he'd borrowed money from my wallet without asking. But the desperate look in my husband's eyes made my objections catch in my throat. 1 week, I conceded finally. The guest room needs to be cleaned anyway. Mark's face broke into a relieved smile as he wrapped his arms around me. You're the best. He'll be here tomorrow evening. Tomorrow? I pulled back. Mark, I have midterms to grade. But he had already left the kitchen, phone in hand, to call his brother. The next evening, Ryan arrived with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag, far more than a week's worth of belongings. At 43, he was 2 years younger than Mark, but looked older. Where my husband's face showed the dignified aging of a dedicated doctor who exercised regularly, Ryan's handsome features had been weathered by stress and hard living. Emma, he greeted me with a hug that smelled faintly of expensive cologne and cigarettes. You're a lifesaver. I returned the hug stiffly. It's good to see you, Ryan. Mark's just putting Sarah to bed, but he'll be down in a minute. Ryan nodded, his eyes darting around our living room. Nice place. You've redone it since I was here last. 3 years ago, I confirmed, leading him toward the guest room. The kids are excited to see their uncle. I bet Daniel's grown a foot, Ryan said, following me down the hallway. And Sarah, she must be what, 7 now? 8, I corrected, opening the guest room door. She's in 3rd grade. The room wasn't large, but I'd spent the afternoon making it as welcoming as possible. Fresh sheets, clean towels, a small vase of flowers from our garden. Ryan set his bags down and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Jessica's being completely unreasonable this time, he said without preamble. She locked me out and told our neighbors I was dangerous. Me. Can you believe that? I hesitated in the doorway. I'm sure you both need some space to cool down. Ryan's face darkened momentarily before he forced a smile. You always were the diplomat, Em. That's why Mark's so lucky. Mark appeared behind me, clapping his brother on the shoulder. Hey, there he is! Sorry about everything, man, but we're glad to have you. I left the brothers catching up and went to finish preparing dinner, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. As I set the table, I heard Ryan's loud laugh from the guest room, followed by Mark's softer chuckle. The Taylor brothers had always been close, despite their differences. Mark, the responsible doctor, and Ryan, the charismatic financial advisor with a talent for charming his way out of trouble. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Ryan entertained the kids with stories that made them giggle, and even I had to admit, he was on his best behavior. No mention of Jessica, no bitter comments, no reaching for wine with dinner. Maybe this time really was different. Uncle Ryan, are you and Aunt Jessica getting divorced? Sarah asked suddenly, with the unfiltered directness of an 8-year-old. The table went silent. Ryan's smile faltered for just a moment before he leaned toward my daughter. No, Pumpkin. Grown-ups sometimes need a timeout, just like kids do. We're just taking a little break to think about things. I caught Mark's eye across the table, and he gave me a grateful look. Maybe 1 week wouldn't be so bad after all. But 1 week turned into 2, then 3. Ryan had a plausible excuse each time. Jessica had changed the locks. His landlord wouldn't let him back into his apartment without her signature. He was waiting for a bonus at work before he could place a deposit on a new place. Mark seemed relieved to have his brother around, and the kids enjoyed their uncle's presence. As for me, I tried to adapt. Ryan was helpful in unexpected ways. He fixed the leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom, picked Sarah up from school when I had late classes, and even cooked dinner occasionally. But there were moments when I'd catch him staring into space, a darkness crossing his features that made me uneasy. A month into Ryan's stay, I was grading papers in my office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jessica's name. Emma, she said when I answered, her voice strained. I'm sorry to bother you, but is Ryan still staying with you? Yes, I replied cautiously. It's been about a month now. There was a long pause. Has it said anything about coming back or about our finances? Not really. I closed my laptop, giving the conversation my full attention. Jessica, is everything okay? I don't know, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. I've been trying to get our bank statements, and they're showing some unusual transfers. Large amounts. I thought maybe Ryan had mentioned something. A chill ran through me. No, he hasn't. Have you asked him directly? He's blocked my number, Jessica said, and his work. Emma, I called his office and they said he hasn't worked there for 3 months. I gripped the phone tighter. What? I think that's why he left. We had a fight because I found an eviction notice in the mail. He claimed it was a mistake, but then I saw his work badge in the trash, and when I asked him about it, she trailed off. He got so angry. That's when I told him to leave. My mind raced back to the night. Ryan arrived. Mark had said he'd been sober for 3 months, exactly the time he'd apparently been unemployed. The coincidence seemed too precise to ignore. I'll talk to Mark, I promised, and I'll keep an eye on Ryan. Thank you, Jessica said. And, Emma, be careful what you say to him. When I confronted him, he wasn't himself. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk. Ryan was supposed to be a successful financial advisor at Wilson Financial Group, a position he'd held for nearly a decade. If he'd lost his job 3 months ago, where had he been going every day dressed in his suits? Where was his income coming from? More importantly, why hadn't he told Mark? That evening, I tried to observe Ryan more carefully at dinner. He talked about his day at the office, describing a difficult client and a successful investment strategy he'd recommended. The lies flowed so smoothly that I almost doubted Jessica's information. Later, when Mark and I were alone in our bedroom, I hesitated before bringing it up. Mark, I began carefully, have you talked to Ryan about his job recently? Mark was reviewing patient charts on his tablet. What about it? Well, it's just that Jessica called today, and she said some things that concerned me. Mark's expression immediately hardened. Jessica is trying to turn everyone against him. You know how manipulative she can be. I blinked, surprised by his defensive tone. I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying maybe we should ask Ryan how things are really going. He's doing fine, Emma. He's my brother. I think I'd know if something was seriously wrong. I bit back my frustration. It's been over a month, Mark. He said he'd be here for a week. Mark set down his tablet and looked at me seriously. He's family. We don't turn our backs on family. I'm not suggesting we throw him out, I said, trying to keep my voice down so it wouldn't carry through the walls. But maybe we should help him make a plan. Set some boundaries. Boundaries, Mark repeated, as if the word left a bad taste in his mouth. He's going through a rough patch. He needs support, not boundaries. I recognized the stubborn set of my husband's jaw and knew this conversation wasn't going anywhere productive tonight. Okay, I conceded. Let's talk about it later. But later never seemed to come. Ryan's 2 suitcases and duffel bag settled into the guest room. His toiletries took up permanent residence in the guest bathroom. He joined our family routines as if he'd always been there, while Mark avoided any discussion about how long this arrangement might continue. 2 months into Ryan's stay, I began to notice small things disappearing around the house. A pair of gold earrings my mother had given me, some cash from my desk drawer, a silver picture frame from the mantel. When I mentioned it to Mark, he suggested I was being forgetful, that the items would turn up. Then one day, I came home early from the college to find Ryan hurriedly ending a phone call in the kitchen. Need more time. I'll get the money, he was saying, his voice tense. No, don't call here again. He hung up and turned, startling when he saw me in the doorway. Emma, I didn't hear you come in. His casual tone didn't match the panic that had flashed across his face. Is everything okay? I asked, setting my bag down on the counter. Perfect, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just dealing with a bill collector. Wrong number. I nodded, not believing him for a second. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Mark was on call at Bayside Hospital, and the house felt different without him. Around 1 a.m., I heard Ryan's door open and his footsteps moving down the hall. Curious, I slipped out of bed and cracked my door open. Through the narrow opening, I saw Ryan leaving the house with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking too quietly for me to hear. I waited for the front door to close, then moved quietly through the darkened house to the guest room. I knew I shouldn't invade his privacy, but Jessica's warnings and the mysterious phone call had heightened my concerns. If Ryan was in some kind of trouble, we needed to know, especially with our children in the house. The guest room was surprisingly tidy, almost impersonal, as if Ryan was careful not to leave any trace of himself. The bed was made, the dresser top clear except for his wallet and keys. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I hesitated, then opened the closet door. His suits hung neatly in a row. I checked the pockets of one jacket and found nothing. The dresser drawers contained neatly folded clothes. I was about to leave when I noticed the corner of his duffel bag peeking out from under the bed. I knelt down and pulled it out. Unlike the rest of the room, the bag was a chaotic mess of papers, notebooks, and what looked like prescription bottles. My heart pounding, I sifted through the contents. The prescriptions were in different names, none of them Ryan's. There were several burner phones, a stack of what appeared to be fake IDs, and a notebook filled with what looked like account numbers and passwords. But what made my blood run cold was a manila envelope containing photos. Surveillance photos of our house, of Mark and me, of the kids at their schools. Some had dates and times written on the back. The most recent was from just 3 days ago. Beneath the photos was a USB drive. I took it, along with one of the notebooks, and carefully returned everything else exactly as I'd found it. I slipped back to my bedroom, my mind racing with questions. Who was Ryan, really? What was he involved in? And why did he have surveillance photos of our family? I hid the USB drive and notebook in my office, behind some books on my shelves. Then I tried to calm my racing heart enough to fake sleep when Ryan returned. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The brother-in-law living in our guest room was not the man we thought he was, and discovering what he was hiding might put us all in danger. The next morning, I waited until Ryan left the house, again in one of his suits, keeping up the pretense of going to work, before I retrieved the USB drive. With shaking hands, I plugged it into my laptop. What I found left me gasping for air. Financial records, identity documents, emails, all pointing to an elaborate fraud scheme. Ryan appeared to be operating under multiple identities, moving money between accounts, targeting wealthy individuals for what looked like investment scams. And most disturbing of all, there were files on Mark. Medical credentials, hospital access codes, patient lists. Why would Ryan need that information about his own brother? I was so absorbed in what I was seeing that I almost missed the sound of the front door opening. I quickly ejected the USB drive and shoved it into my pocket just as Ryan appeared in my office doorway. "Emma," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I thought you had classes all day." "Canceled," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Water main break on campus." His eyes scanned my office, lingering on my laptop. "Working on grades?" "Always," I forced a smile. "Shouldn't you be at the office?" "Forgot some documents." His gaze was calculating, different from the charming brother-in-law I thought I knew. "Actually, I was wondering if you've seen a USB drive of mine, small black one, might have fallen out of my bag." My pulse thundered in my ears. "No, sorry. I'll keep an eye out for it." He studied me for a long moment, and I had the distinct feeling he didn't believe me. "Thanks. It has some important work files." After he left, without going to his room to get any forgotten documents, I immediately called Megan, my best friend since college. "I need to see you, now. It's important." 30 minutes later, we sat in a booth at the back of the corner cafe, well away from any other customers. I'd brought copies of some of the files, and Megan, who worked in cybersecurity, reviewed them with growing alarm. "Emma, this is serious," she said finally, keeping her voice low. "This isn't just fraud. Some of these emails look like they're discussing money laundering. And these medical credentials? This could be related to prescription drug trafficking." "What do I do?" I whispered. "Mark won't believe me. He thinks Jessica is making up stories about Ryan." Megan pushed her dark hair behind her ears, thinking, "You need evidence he can't ignore, and you need to be careful. If Ryan realizes you know." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "I think he already suspects something," I admitted. "He came looking for the USB drive." "Then you don't have much time," Megan said, gathering the papers. "I have a friend who works with the Riverdale PD. Let me talk to him, show him some of this, without mentioning names yet." As I drove home, my phone rang. Jessica again. "Emma, I got a call from our bank," she said, her voice shaking. "Someone tried to empty our accounts yesterday. They had all my information, my social security number, everything. The bank flagged it as suspicious and blocked it, but they said it wasn't the first attempt." "Where are you now?" I asked, suddenly concerned for her safety. "At my sister's in Westlake." "I'm scared, Emma. This isn't just about money anymore. Yesterday I found out someone's been using my identity to open credit lines. And there are prescriptions in my name for medications I've never taken." I pulled into a gas station parking lot, needing to focus on the conversation. Jessica, I found something in Ryan's room. Financial records, fake IDs, surveillance photos of our family. The line went silent for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then Jessica spoke, her voice barely audible. Emma, Ryan's not who you think he is. When we got married, I thought I knew him. But over the years, I started finding things. Inconsistencies in his stories, unexplained absences, money that didn't add up. What are you saying? I think, she hesitated. I think Ryan might have been involved in something illegal. For years. The last time we fought, he said if I ever told anyone what I knew, he'd make sure I regretted it. My blood ran cold. We need to go to the police. With what? Jessica countered. Suspicions? He's too careful. Everything is hidden, and he has answers for everything. Do you think I haven't tried? They said it was a domestic dispute, that I needed evidence of actual crimes. As I pulled back onto the road, my mind was racing. Jessica was right. We needed concrete evidence, something undeniable. And I might know where to find it. When I got home, the house was quiet. Ryan's car wasn't in the driveway. I went straight to the guest room and pulled out the duffel bag again. This time, I photographed everything. The fake IDs, the prescription bottles, the surveillance photos. I copied more files from the notebooks, looking for anything that could provide definitive proof of illegal activity. Then I saw it. A small, leather-bound journal pushed to the bottom of the bag. Unlike the business-like notebooks, this appeared personal. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were handwritten entries dating back years, detailing operations, contacts, money movements. It was all there. The fraud schemes, the identity theft, even references to prescription drug trafficking using medical credentials from various hospitals. And then a name jumped out at me. Mark Taylor, Bayside Hospital, followed by a list of high-value medications and quantities. My hands trembled as I took photos of these pages. Ryan wasn't just using our home as a convenient place to stay. He was using Mark's medical credentials for his operations. Whether Mark knew it or not, my husband was involved. I heard a car in the driveway and hastily returned everything to the bag, sliding it back under the bed. I slipped out of the room just as the front door opened. "Mom?" Daniel called. "Are you home?" My teenage son stood in the hallway, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey, honey," I said, trying to sound normal. "How was school?" "Fine," he shrugged. "Uncle Ryan picked me up. He said you asked him to." I froze. "Where is he now?" "He got a call and had to go out again. Said he'd be back for dinner." I checked my phone. There were no messages from Ryan about picking up Daniel, and I certainly hadn't asked him to. The realization that he'd taken my son without permission sent a chill through me. "Daniel, did Uncle Ryan say anything unusual to you?" My son gave me a strange look. "Not really." "Oh, he did ask if I knew your laptop password. Said you were going to let him use it for work since his was broken." I tried to keep my expression neutral. "Did you tell him?" "No," Daniel frowned. "I told him I didn't know it." I pulled my son into a hug, relief washing over me. "Good. That's good." "Mom, you're being weird," he complained, wiggling out of my embrace. "I'm going to my room." As soon as he was gone, I called Mark at the hospital. "You need to come. Home. Now." "Emma, I'm in the middle of rounds. What's going on?" "It's about Ryan," I said, keeping my voice low. "It's serious, Mark. Please." There must have been something in my tone that finally got through to him. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I paced the kitchen, the copied evidence in a folder on the counter. How would I make Mark understand? How could I convince him that his beloved brother was not just a man going through a divorce, but potentially a dangerous criminal? When Mark arrived, his face was etched with concern. "What's happened?" I pointed to the folder. You need to look at this. As Mark went through the documents, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, to something I'd rarely seen on my husband's face: pure, cold anger. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice unnaturally calm. "From Ryan's things. Mark, he's been using your medical credentials. These prescriptions, these patient lists, it's all from Bayside." Mark sat heavily at the kitchen table. "It's not possible." He wouldn't. "Jessica's identity has been stolen. There are surveillance photos of our family in his bag. He picked up Daniel from school today without permission." I put my hand over his. "Mark, I'm scared." My husband stared at the evidence, his medical mind processing the implications with clinical precision. "If he's been writing prescriptions under my name, Emma, that could cost me my license. It could lead to criminal charges." "I know," I said softly. "That's why we need to go to the police before this gets worse." Mark looked up at me, his eyes haunted. How could I have been so blind? Before I could answer, we heard the front door open. Ryan's voice called out cheerfully, "Something smells good. What's for dinner?" He walked into the kitchen and stopped short when he saw Mark sitting at the table, the evidence spread out before him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ryan's face transformed, the mask of the charming brother-in-law falling away completely. "You just couldn't mind your own business, could you, Emma?" he said, his voice cold. Mark stood slowly. "It's over, Ryan. Whatever you're involved in, it stops now." Ryan laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "You have no idea what you're talking about, big brother. I know you've been using my credentials to write fraudulent prescriptions," Mark said. "I know you've been conducting surveillance on my family. I know you've been stealing Jessica's identity." "Jessica!" Ryan spat the name. "She's been feeding you lies. She's unstable, you know that." "These aren't lies," I said, pointing to the photos on the table. "You took these. You've been watching us. Why?" Ryan's eyes darted between us, then to the doorway behind him. "Family. Takes care of family, right, Mark? That's what you always say. So take care of this. Destroy those papers, forget what you think you know, and I'll be gone by morning. No harm done." "No harm?" Mark's voice rose. "You've put my career at risk. My reputation. You've endangered my family." "I protected your family," Ryan shouted suddenly. "You have no idea what I've done for you over the years, the people I've kept away from your perfect little life." Mark stared at his brother. "What are you talking about?" Ryan's expression shifted to something calculating. "Remember Dad's gambling debts? Who do you think paid those off when he died? The loan sharks were ready to come after all of us. I took care of it." "That was 15 years ago," Mark said. "What does that have to do with what you're doing now?" "Everything," Ryan hissed. "You think you just pay off people like that and walk away? I've been managing the situation for years, making payments, doing favors, keeping them away from you, from Mom. They own me, and by extension, they own part of you too." I felt a chill run through me. "Who are they, Ryan?" He ignored me, focusing on his brother. "I needed access to certain medications. Using your credentials was easier than trying to recruit doctors. It was just business, nothing personal." Mark's face had gone pale. "Nothing personal? You used me. You put my patients at risk." "No one got hurt," Ryan insisted. "Look, I can fix this. I just need a little more time, a little more money, and I can get clear of these people for good." "We're going to the police," Mark said firmly. "You need help, Ryan." Something dangerous flashed in Ryan's eyes. That would be a mistake. The tension in the kitchen was broken by Sarah's voice from the doorway. "Daddy? Uncle Ryan? Why are you shouting?" All three of us turned to see my daughter standing there, confusion on her small face. Ryan's expression softened instantly, the mask sliding back into place. "Hey, Pumpkin," he said. "Grown-ups are just having a disagreement. Nothing to worry about." Mark moved to Sarah's side, placing himself between her and his brother. "Sarah, go find your brother. Tell him to come downstairs, please." As Sarah reluctantly left the kitchen, Ryan's face hardened again. "Think about what you're doing, Mark. Think about your family." "I am thinking about my family," Mark said, quietly. "That's why this ends now." I picked up my phone. "I'm calling the police." Ryan's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. "Don't!" Mark moved faster than I'd ever seen him, shoving his brother back. "Don't touch her!" The brothers stared at each other, the years of shared history and unspoken truths hanging between them. Then Ryan seemed to deflate, all the fight going out of him at once. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said, his voice suddenly tired. "But fine, call them. It won't just be me who goes down for this." As I dialed 911, my hands shaking, I couldn't help but wonder if he was right. How far did this conspiracy reach? Who else was involved? And what would the consequences be for our family once everything was exposed? But as I met Mark's eyes across the kitchen, I knew we had no choice. The truth, however painful, was better than living in the shadow of Ryan's deception. Whatever came next, we would face it together. "This is 911. What's your emergency?" "My name is Emma Taylor," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to report multiple crimes taking place at 427 Oakwood Drive. Identity theft, prescription fraud, and possible organized criminal activity. The suspect is in our home, right now." As I spoke, I watched Ryan's face. There was no surprise there, no shock at the allegations. Just a cold resignation that confirmed what I already knew. The brother-in-law who had moved in just for a week 6 months ago had brought something dangerous into our home. And what I'd found in his room hadn't just left my husband speechless, it had changed our lives forever. The police arrived within minutes, their cruisers pulling up to our house with silent lights flashing. Detective Anderson took charge of the scene, a veteran officer with weary eyes who'd clearly seen this kind of situation before. As uniformed officers led Ryan away in handcuffs, I watched my husband's face. Mark stood in our driveway, his expression a mixture of shock, betrayal, and grief as his brother was placed in the back of a police car. "Dr. Taylor," Detective Anderson said, turning to Mark, "we'll need a statement from both of you down at the station." Mark nodded numbly. "Our children—" "I'll call Claire," I said quickly, pulling out my phone to contact my sister. "She can come stay with them." While we waited for Claire to arrive, Detective Anderson had officers begin cataloging the evidence from Ryan's room. They brought out the duffel bag, the fake IDs, the prescription bottles, all carefully bagged and labeled. Each item seemed to hit Mark like a physical blow. "Sir," one of the officers called from the guest room doorway, "you might want to see this." Detective Anderson disappeared into the house. When he returned, his expression was even more serious. "Mrs. Taylor, do you own a handgun?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "No. We don't have any firearms in the house." "Are you certain of that?" Mark and I exchanged glances. "Absolutely certain," Mark confirmed. The detective nodded to the officer beside him, who held up an evidence bag containing a pistol. This was found taped to the underside of the guest bed. Unregistered, serial number filed off. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Ryan had brought a gun into our home, a home with our children. The reality of the danger we'd been in suddenly crystallized, and I felt my knees weaken. "I had no idea," Mark whispered. "I swear, I had no idea." Claire arrived, flustered and concerned, full of questions I couldn't answer in front of the children. I took her aside in the kitchen while Mark continued speaking with the detective. "What's happening, Emma?" she asked, her eyes wide with alarm. "Why are there police cars everywhere? Where are they taking Ryan?" I kept my voice low. Ryan's in trouble. Serious trouble. I can't explain everything right now, but Mark and I need to go to the police station. Can you stay with the kids until we get back? Of course, she agreed, though confusion was written across her face. But is everyone okay? Are you in danger? We're safe now, I assured her, hoping it was true. Just don't let the kids watch the news tonight, okay? At the Riverdale police station, Mark and I were separated for individual questioning. I was led to a small interview room with bare walls and uncomfortable chairs. Detective Anderson sat across from me, a digital recorder placed between us on the table. Mrs. Taylor, I understand this is difficult, he began, his voice gentler than I expected. But I need you to walk me through everything from the beginning. When did your brother-in-law move into your home? For the next 2 hours, I recounted the entire story: Ryan's arrival, Jessica's concerns, the mysterious phone calls, and finally, my discovery of the evidence in his room. The detective took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification. And you said your husband had no knowledge of his brother's activities? He asked. None, I insisted. Mark was blind when it came to Ryan. They've always had a complicated relationship. Their father was a gambler, left them with nothing but debts when he died. Mark worked his way through medical school on scholarships and student loans. Ryan always seemed to find easier paths. Detective Anderson's expression revealed nothing. And yet your husband provided him with a place to stay, no questions asked. Mark believes in second chances, I said, defending my husband even as I recognized how naive it sounded. He thought Ryan was getting sober, fixing his marriage. He had no idea about the fraud or the identity theft, and he certainly didn't know Ryan was using his medical credentials. The detective nodded thoughtfully. Mrs. Taylor, I should inform you that we've been investigating a prescription drug trafficking operation for several months. The evidence you discovered may be connected to a much larger case. My stomach dropped. Larger how? We believe multiple medical professionals across 3 hospitals may be involved, wittingly or unwittingly. Bayside Hospital has had unusual prescription patterns flagged by the DEA. Mark wouldn't, I began. I'm not accusing your husband, Detective Anderson interrupted gently. But his credentials may have been compromised beyond what you've already discovered. We'll need his full cooperation to determine the extent. By the time we were allowed to leave, it was past midnight. Mark was silent during the drive home, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I wanted to comfort him, but I didn't know what to say. His brother was in jail, his professional reputation potentially in tatters. He told me he was sober, Mark finally said as we pulled into our driveway. 3 months sober, that's why I let him stay. I thought he was finally getting his life together. You couldn't have known, I said, placing my hand over his. I should have. His voice cracked. The signs were all there. The mood swings, the secretive phone calls, the way he'd disappear for hours. I just didn't want to see them. Claire met us at the door, her face pale with worry. The kids are asleep, she whispered. I told them there was a misunderstanding, that everything was fine. What's really going on, Emma? We settled in the living room, and I gave her an abbreviated version of events. As I spoke, Claire's expression shifted from confusion to horror. My God, she breathed when I finished. Identity theft? Prescription fraud? This is like something from a crime show, not real life. Mark sat with his head in his hands. It's real enough. And tomorrow, I have to go to the hospital and explain to the chief of staff why prescription pads with my signature have been circulating outside the hospital. Claire squeezed his shoulder sympathetically before gathering her things to leave. At the door, she hugged me tightly. Call me if you need anything at all. After she left, I made tea that neither of us wanted. a futile attempt at normalcy in a house that felt forever changed. The guest room door remained closed, yellow police tape across it. Officers had told us not to disturb anything until they returned in the morning for additional evidence collection. "What do we tell the kids?" Mark asked, staring into his untouched mug. It was the question that had been haunting me for hours. Daniel was old enough to understand most of what had happened, but how do you explain to an 8-year-old that her beloved uncle was a criminal? "The truth," I said finally. "A simplified version, but the truth. They need to understand why Ryan won't be coming back." Mark nodded, his exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "I have to call my mother in the morning. And Jessica. God, Jessica was trying to warn us all along." "We believed what we wanted to believe," I said softly. Ryan was always good at making people see what he wanted them to see. We went to bed but didn't sleep. Mark tossed and turned beside me, occasionally reaching for my hand in the darkness. My mind kept returning to the surveillance photos in Ryan's bag. How long had he been watching us? What had he planned to do with those images? Around 4 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Megan. "Just heard what happened. My police contact filled me in. Are you okay? Call me when you can." I typed back a quick response. "We're safe. Exhausted. We'll call tomorrow." Just as I was about to set my phone down, another message appeared. This one from a number I didn't recognize. "This isn't over. Ryan has friends. Watch your back." My heart pounded as I showed the text to Mark, who immediately sat up, fully alert. "We need to call Detective Anderson." The detective answered on the third ring, sounding as if he hadn't been asleep either. When I read him the message, he promised to send a patrol car to keep an eye on our house for the rest of the night. "Should we be worried?" I asked him directly. There was a pause before he answered. "Mrs. Taylor, I won't sugarcoat this. The operation your brother-in-law was involved with isn't small time. These people don't appreciate loose ends. Until we have a better understanding of who sent that message, I'd advise caution." Mark and I sat up for the remainder of the night, jumping at every sound, watching the soft glow of the patrol car's lights through our bedroom curtains. When dawn finally broke, I felt as if I'd aged a decade in a single night. Telling the children was as difficult as I'd feared. Daniel listened in shocked silence, his teenage face struggling to process that the uncle who'd taught him to throw a perfect spiral was now in jail. Sarah burst into tears, insisting there must be a mistake. "But Uncle Ryan is nice," she protested. "He helps me with my homework and makes the best pancakes." "Sometimes," I began carefully, "people can do nice things and bad things. Uncle Ryan made some very bad choices, and now he has to face the consequences." "Will he go to prison?" Daniel asked, his voice small. Mark nodded gravely. "Probably, yes." "For how long?" "We don't know yet, buddy," Mark said. "That will be up to the courts to decide." After the children left for school, driven by a police officer in an unmarked car at Detective Anderson's insistence, Mark faced his next ordeal, calling his mother. Linda Taylor had retired to Florida 5 years earlier, enjoying her golden years with her second husband, Greg. She adored both her sons, but had always been particularly protective of Ryan, the younger, more troubled of the two. I sat beside Mark as he made the call, holding his hand as he broke the news. I could hear Linda's voice rise in disbelief through the phone, demanding to know if there had been a mistake. "No, Mom," Mark said, his voice steady despite his pain. "It's not a mistake. Ryan was using my medical credentials to obtain prescription drugs illegally. He had fake IDs, surveillance equipment. The police found an unregistered gun in our house." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, unexpectedly, Linda began to cry. Not the shocked tears of a mother learning her son is a criminal, but the weary sobs of someone who has carried a burden for too long. I should have told you, she said finally. Years ago, when it first started happening. Mark frowned, putting the phone on speaker. Told me what, Mom? The money, Linda said. After your father died, when Ryan said he'd handled the gambling debts. I knew something wasn't right. He suddenly had cash, a new car. I asked him once where it all came from, and he said he had investors who believed in him. Why didn't you say anything? Mark asked, his voice strained. Because I wanted to believe him, Linda cried. Because he was finally doing well, or so I thought. And then years passed, and it became easier to just not ask questions. After promising his mother he would keep her updated, Mark ended the call and sat in silence, processing this new information. She knew, he said finally. All these years, she suspected something wasn't right with Ryan's finances, and she never said a word. She wanted to protect him, I said, though the words felt hollow. Linda's silence had enabled Ryan's behavior to continue, to escalate, until it had endangered all of us. Mark had to leave for the hospital, where an emergency meeting had been called with the chief of staff, hospital legal counsel, and representatives from the DEA. I offered to go with him, but he shook his head. This part I need to handle alone, he said, straightening his tie with unsteady hands. I need to look them in the eye and make them understand that I had no knowledge of what Ryan was doing. After he left, the house felt unnaturally quiet. The police had finally removed the tape from Ryan's room, having collected all the evidence they needed. I stood in the doorway, looking at the now bare space. The officers had taken nearly everything: clothing, personal items, even the bedding. With rubber gloves on, I began to clean. I needed to reclaim this space, to remove any trace of the deception that had lived under our roof for 6 months. I scrubbed the walls, washed the windows, vacuumed every inch of carpet. Physical labor helped distract my mind from the swirling questions and fears. As I was wiping down the closet shelves, my hand hit something taped to the underside of the top shelf. Carefully, I peeled it away, a small leather-bound notebook, different from the one I'd found in Ryan's duffel bag. This one was older, the pages yellowed with age. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were entries dating back 15 years, around the time Ryan and Jessica had first met. The early pages detailed gambling debts, loan sharks, and increasingly desperate attempts to find money. Then a name appeared: Victor Mercer. Mercer offered a solution, Ryan had written. Simple job, big payoff, just need hospital access. Mark has that. My blood ran cold. 15 years ago? Mark was still a medical resident then. Had Ryan been using his brother's credentials even back then? I flipped through more pages, the entries becoming increasingly cryptic. Locations, dates, amounts of money. Names that meant nothing to me. Then, on a page dated just 2 months before Ryan moved in with us, I found something that made my heart stop. M getting suspicious. Asking too many questions about the Bayside accounts. Need to accelerate timeline. Taylor House provides perfect cover. M Mark? Or perhaps Mercer? And what did accelerate timeline mean? The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me back to the present. I looked out the window, expecting to see Mark's car, but instead saw an unfamiliar black sedan. 2 men in suits emerged, approaching our front door with purposeful strides. I quickly hid the notebook in my pocket and went to answer the door, keeping the security chain latched as I opened it a crack. Mrs. Taylor? The taller man asked, holding up a badge. Agent Morris, DEA. This is Agent Kapoor. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your brother-in-law, Ryan Wilson. I examined their badges carefully, remembering the fake IDs in Ryan's possession. I've already given my statement to Detective Anderson. We're working in conjunction with local police, Agent Kapoor explained. This is a multi-jurisdictional investigation now. May we come in? Reluctantly, I let them in, leading them to the living room. I offered coffee, which they declined, then sat across from them, hands folded in my lap to hide their slight trembling. Mrs. Taylor, we understand you discovered evidence of your brother-in-law's activities, Agent Morris began. We'd like to go over exactly what you found and when. For the second time in 24 hours, I recounted the story of my discovery. This time, I left out the notebook I'd just found, some instinct telling me to keep that information to myself for now. And your husband had no involvement in or knowledge of these activities? Agent Kapoor asked, his tone suggesting skepticism. None, I said firmly. Mark trusted his brother. Ryan took advantage of that trust. The agents exchanged glances. Mrs. Taylor, are you familiar with the name Victor Mercer? Agent Morris asked. The name from the notebook. I tried to keep my expression neutral. No. Should I be? Victor Mercer is a person of interest in our investigation, Agent Kapoor explained. We have reason to believe he was Ryan Wilson's contact, possibly his handler in the organization. Organization? I repeated. A sophisticated network involving prescription drug trafficking, identity theft, and money laundering, Agent Morris clarified. We've been tracking their activities for nearly 2 years now. 2 years. This had been going on right under our noses, and we'd had no idea. I thought of all the times Ryan had picked up the children from school, had been alone in our house, had access to our personal information. We believe your brother-in-law was a mid-level operator, Agent Kapoor continued. Not a kingpin, but not just a foot soldier either. His position as a financial advisor gave him access to wealthy clients whose identities could be exploited. And his connection to your husband provided access to prescription medications, Agent Morris added. I felt a surge of defensive anger. Mark had nothing to do with this. Nothing. We're not suggesting he did, Agent Kapoor said soothingly. But the fact remains that someone with your husband's credentials was writing fraudulent prescriptions for nearly 3 years. 3 years. Long before Ryan had moved in with us. The implications were staggering. If not Mark, then who? I asked. That's what we're trying to determine, Agent Morris said. Your brother-in-law isn't being particularly cooperative at the moment. After the agents left, I sat in the silent house, the hidden notebook seeming to burn in my pocket. Should I turn it over to the authorities? But something held me back, the same instinct that had kept me from mentioning it to the DEA agents. I called Megan, needing the perspective of someone I could trust completely. Emma, thank God, she answered immediately. I've been worried sick. Are you alone? Yes, I confirmed. Mark is at the hospital, dealing with the fallout there. Listen to me very carefully, Megan said, her voice uncharacteristically serious. My contact at the Riverdale PD says this goes deeper than anyone initially thought. There may be law enforcement involved in this operation. A chill ran through me. What are you saying? I'm saying be careful who you trust right now, even the authorities. I thought of the DEA agents who had just left my house. Megan, I found something. Another notebook Ryan kept hidden. It mentioned someone named Victor Mercer. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Emma, Victor Mercer used to be DEA. He was forced out 5 years ago under suspicion of corruption, but nothing was ever proven. Now he's a ghost, rumored to be running operations but never directly connected to them. My mind raced. If Mercer was former DEA, then he would know exactly how to avoid detection, and he would have contacts still in the agency. 2 agents were just here, I told her. They asked about Mercer specifically. Did you tell them about the notebook? No, I admitted. Something didn't feel right. Good instinct, Megan said. Don't tell anyone about it yet. I'm going to make some calls, see what I can find out about these agents. After hanging up, I paced the living room, the weight of the notebook heavy in my pocket. What had Ryan gotten us involved in? How deep did this go? And if law enforcement was potentially compromised, who could we trust? Mark returned home mid-afternoon, his face ashen. The meeting at the hospital had been grueling. His privileges had been temporarily suspended pending the investigation, though the chief of staff had assured him this was standard procedure, not an assumption of guilt. "They showed me the prescriptions," he said, collapsing onto the couch. "Perfect forgeries of my signature on legitimate Bayside prescription pads. Dozens of them, Emma, over a 3-year period." I sat beside him, taking his hand. "The DEA was here while you were gone." Mark's head snapped up. "What did they want?" I recounted the conversation, watching his expression grow increasingly troubled. "They mentioned someone named Victor. Mercer. Does that name mean anything to you?" Mark frowned, thinking. "No, I don't think so. Wait, actually, I might have met someone with that name at one of Ryan's parties years ago. Before he married Jessica. A business associate," he said. I pulled out the notebook. "I found this hidden in Ryan's room after the police left. It goes back 15 years, Mark, and it mentions Mercer." Mark took the notebook with trembling hands, flipping through the pages. As he read, his face drained of color. "This can't be right," he whispered. "According to this, Ryan has been using my credentials since I was a resident. That's not possible. I would have known." But as he continued reading, the evidence became harder to deny. Ryan had been involved in illegal activities for far longer than either of us had imagined, and he had been using Mark's medical access as part of those activities from the very beginning. "He was my brother," Mark said, his voice breaking. "I trusted him completely." I moved closer, wrapping my arm around his shoulders. "We both did." The doorbell rang, startling us both. Mark quickly tucked the notebook under a sofa cushion before I went to answer it. Detective Anderson stood on our porch, his expression grim. "Mrs. Taylor, Dr. Taylor," he greeted us as I let him in. "I'm afraid I have some troubling news." We led him to the living room, where he declined to sit, remaining standing as if he might need to leave quickly. "Ryan Wilson escaped custody during a prisoner transfer this afternoon," he said without preamble. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. "Escaped? How is that possible?" "We're still investigating, but it appears he had help from the inside. A corrections officer is missing as well." Mark stood up, his doctor's instincts kicking in despite his shock. "Are you saying he could be heading here? That we're in danger?" Detective Anderson nodded gravely. "It's a possibility we have to consider. I've arranged for a protective detail to be stationed outside your home, and we're monitoring all known associates. But until he's recaptured, I'd advise extreme caution." "The children," I gasped. "They're at school." "I've already sent officers to bring them home safely," the detective assured me. "They should be here any minute." As if on cue, we heard cars pulling into the driveway. Through the window, I could see a police cruiser, with Daniel and Sarah in the back seat, looking confused and frightened. Detective Anderson turned to leave. "I'll let you explain the situation to your children. The officers outside will remain in position until further notice. If you see or hear anything suspicious, anything at all, call me immediately." As the detective left, the children came running in, full of questions. Mark and I exchanged glances, silently agreeing on how much to tell them. "There's been a complication," Mark said carefully. "Uncle Ryan isn't where he's supposed to be right now, so the police are going to be watching our house for a little while, just to make sure we're safe." "Did he escape from jail?" Daniel asked bluntly, always too perceptive for his age. "Yes," I admitted, seeing no point in lying. "But the police will find him soon. In the meantime, we're going to stay home together." Sarah's lower lip trembled. "Is Uncle Ryan going to hurt us?" "No, sweetheart," I said firmly, pulling her into a hug. "The police are just being extra careful. No one is going to hurt us." But as I met Mark's eyes over our daughter's head, I could see he shared my unspoken fear. Ryan knew our home intimately. He knew our routines, our vulnerabilities. And if he was desperate enough to escape custody, what else might he be capable of? That night, none of us slept well despite the reassuring presence of the police outside. Mark and I took turns checking the doors and windows, jumping at every creak and groan of our old house settling. The children slept in our room, Sarah curled between us in the bed, Daniel on a makeshift pallet on the floor. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "He's coming for what belongs to him. Don't get in his way." I showed Mark, who immediately called Detective Anderson despite the hour. The detective promised to trace the number, though he didn't sound optimistic about their chances of success. "What belongs to him?" Mark wondered after hanging up. What could Ryan possibly have left here that would be worth the risk of coming back? Then it hit me. The notebook. It contains names, dates, locations. It's evidence that could implicate others in the organization. Mark pulled the notebook from its hiding place, turning it over in his hands. Should we turn this in now? I hesitated, remembering Megan's warning about not knowing who to trust. Let me call Megan first. Her police contact might know who's safe. But when I tried Megan's number, it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text, then tried again. Nothing. That's odd, I said, anxiety creeping into my voice. She always answers, even in the middle of the night. Mark looked up from the notebook, his expression troubled. Emma, some of these entries, they mention payoffs to law enforcement, specific names. If what's written here is true, this goes beyond just a prescription drug ring. The implications were staggering. If Ryan had been paying off police officers, who could we trust? Was Detective Anderson involved? The DEA agents? Was that why Ryan had been able to escape so easily? We need to get this information to someone we can trust, I said. But who? Mark thought for a moment. Greg, my stepfather. Before he retired, he was FBI, specializing in public corruption cases. He'd know how to handle this, who to take it to. I nodded slowly. But he's in Florida, and if we can't trust the local police, how do we get the notebook to him safely? Mark's eyes met mine, the terrible answer clear between us. One of us would have to go, to take the evidence directly to Greg, and the other would have to stay, with the children. I'll go, Mark said firmly. First thing in the morning. You stay here with Daniel and Sarah. No, I shook my head. You're the one Ryan wants to hurt. He used your credentials, betrayed your trust. I should go. We argued in whispers, mindful of the sleeping children just feet away. Finally, exhausted, we agreed that I would go. I could blend into a crowd, more easily than Mark, whose face had been on the local news as the victim of medical identity theft. As dawn broke, we made hasty preparations. I would drive to the next state over, then fly to Florida from there, a precaution in case anyone was monitoring local flights. Mark would stay with the children, maintaining normal routines as much as possible under police protection. Just get the notebook to Greg, Mark said as he embraced me at the door. He'll know what to do with it. I held him tightly, fear making my voice catch. Be careful. Don't trust anyone until I call you from Greg's. He nodded, his face solemn. 48 hours. If I don't hear from you by then? You will, I promised, not wanting to think about the alternative. With the notebook hidden in a specially sewn pocket in my jacket, I slipped out the back door while it was still barely light, using the neighbor's yard to reach the street where Megan was waiting in her car. She had finally responded to my messages an hour earlier, apologizing for the silence. She'd been in a late meeting with her police contact. Are you sure about this? She asked as I slid into the passenger seat. It's not too late to reconsider, to turn everything over to Detective Anderson. I shook my head firmly. We can't risk it. Not until we know who's compromised and who isn't. As Megan pulled away from the curb, I looked back at my home, the porch where Sarah had learned to ride a tricycle, the window of the guest room, where a predator had lived among us for 6 months, the driveway where Mark stood watching us leave, his hand raised in a farewell that felt far too final. "We need to hurry," I said, turning to face forward. "If Ryan really is coming back for the notebook, we don't have much time." Megan drove with focused intensity, taking a circuitous route out of Riverside to ensure we weren't being followed. The weight of the notebook pressed against my ribs, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Rain began to fall, light at first, then in heavy sheets that reduced visibility and seemed to wash away the familiar landscape of my hometown, transforming it into something alien and threatening. "Any word from Mark?" Megan asked, breaking the tense silence as we finally reached the highway. I checked my phone, no messages. "Nothing yet. He'll text when the children are at school." "Are you sure sending them to school was the right call?" Megan glanced at me, concern etched on her face. "If Ryan is really desperate enough to come back?" "Detective Anderson has officers watching the school," I said, repeating Mark's reasoning, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "And we need to maintain normal routines, for the children's sake. They're scared enough already." The truth was more complicated. Mark and I had argued about this very point before I left. I wanted to keep the children home, safe under his watchful eye. He insisted that the police protection was adequate, that keeping them home would only heighten their anxiety. In the end, I'd reluctantly agreed, but the decision gnawed at me with every mile that increased between us. "I still can't believe—" "Ryan escaped," Megan said, shaking her head. "A corrections officer helping him? That just proves how right you are about potential corruption." I stared out at the rain-soaked highway. "The notebook mentions payments to someone identified only as CA. Detective Anderson's initials are CA, Charles Anderson." Megan's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Or it could be someone else entirely. Maybe a court administrator or county attorney. We can't jump to conclusions." "That's why we need to get this to Greg," I said. "He'll know how to investigate properly, how to determine who's involved and who isn't." 2 hours. Later, we reached the airport in the neighboring state. Megan pulled into short-term parking, and we sat for a moment in silence, rain drumming on the roof of her car. "Your flight leaves in 90 minutes, she said, checking the time. "Once you're in Florida, go straight to Greg's. Don't stop anywhere. Don't talk to anyone you don't have to." I nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what I was doing. "Megan, if something happens to me—" "Nothing is going to happen," she interrupted firmly. "You're going to deliver the notebook. Greg is going to take it to his FBI contacts, and this whole nightmare will be over." She squeezed my hand. "But just in case, I made a copy of the most important pages. It's hidden in my apartment, and only my sister knows where." This was news to me. "When did you do that?" "Last night, when you went to check on the children," Megan admitted. "I took photos with my phone, then deleted them after I printed them out. If anything happens to either of us, my sister will know what to do with them." I felt a rush of gratitude for my friend's foresight. "Thank you." We embraced, and then I was walking through the rain to the terminal, constantly glancing over my shoulder, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Inside, I purchased my ticket with cash, another precaution, and moved quickly to security. As I waited in line, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Kids at school safely. Officers confirmed in position. Call when you land. Love you." I texted back a brief acknowledgement, then powered down my phone. Another precaution: no trackable electronic signals. I wouldn't turn it on again until I reached Florida. The flight was uneventful. 3 hours of forced inactivity that left my mind free to race through worst-case scenarios. What if Ryan had already returned to Riverside? What if the police protection wasn't enough? What if the notebook I carried wasn't evidence but a target, making me a moving bullseye? In Florida, I rented a car under the name Emma Chen, my maiden name, and began the drive to Naples, where Mark's mother and Greg had retired. The Sunshine State failed to live up to its name that day, with dark clouds and intermittent rain. Following me south on I-75, I turned my phone on briefly, just long enough to send Mark my estimated arrival time at his mother's condo, then powered it off again. The less digital footprint I left, the better. Linda and Greg's retirement community was a pristine collection of pastel-colored buildings surrounding a golf course, the kind of place where residents zipped around in golf carts and security guards manned the entrance gates. I gave the guard my name, Emma Chen, again, and said I was visiting my mother. He checked a list, nodded, and waved me through. Linda opened the door before I could knock, her face lined with worry. "Emma," she whispered, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Thank God you're here safely." Greg stood behind her, his former FBI agent's bearing evident in his straight posture and alert eyes. At 68, he was still fit, his silver hair cut in the same short style he'd worn his entire career. "Let's talk inside," he said, ushering me in and checking the hallway before closing and double-locking the door. Their condo was immaculate, decorated in the coastal blues and whites that seemed mandatory in Florida retirement communities. Linda led me to the kitchen, where she'd prepared sandwiches and coffee. The normality of it, lunch waiting as if this were just a routine family visit, struck me as both comforting and absurd given the circumstances. "Mark called us," Greg said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "Explained everything. I've made some calls to former colleagues who are still active in the bureau, people I trust completely." I reached into my jacket and removed the notebook, placing it carefully on the table between us. This is what Ryan was willing to escape custody to retrieve. It details everything: the prescription fraud, the identity theft, and what looks like systematic corruption of law enforcement over at least a decade. Greg didn't touch the notebook immediately. Instead, he put on a pair of reading glasses and latex gloves, handling the evidence with ingrained professional care. As he began to read, his expression grew increasingly grim. "This implicates people at multiple levels," he said after several minutes. "DEA, local police, even a federal prosecutor." He looked up at me. "If even half of this is accurate, it's one of the most extensive corruption networks I've seen in 30 years of law enforcement." Linda, who had been silently making coffee, suddenly spoke. "Did you get to the part about James yet?" I frowned, confused. "James?" Greg shot his wife a warning look, but she continued, her voice tight with emotion. "James Taylor, Mark and Ryan's father." A chill ran through me despite the Florida humidity. "What about him?" Greg sighed, removing his glasses. "According to some of these entries, James Taylor wasn't just a gambler who left his family with debts. He was involved with this organization from the beginning. His gambling debts were just a cover story." I struggled to process this. Mark's father had been dead for 15 years. I'd never met him, knew him only through family stories. A charming but irresponsible man who'd abandoned his family for gambling and drink, leaving Mark to put himself through medical school while caring for his younger brother and mother. "That can't be right," I said. "Mark would have known." "Would he?" Linda asked softly. "James was very good at compartmentalizing his life. The boys never knew about his other activities." "But you did," I realized, studying my mother-in-law's face. "You knew." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "Not everything. Not at first. By the time I understood what he was involved in, it was too late. He had already drawn Ryan in. Ryan was only 16 when James started taking him along to meetings," Greg explained, his arm around his wife's shoulders, "grooming him to follow in his footsteps." "And you never told Mark?" "I couldn't keep by the accusation from my voice. "We thought it was over when James died," Linda said defensively. "Ryan seemed to be doing well, college, then his financial advisor career. I convinced myself it had been a phase, that Ryan had escaped his father's influence." Greg nodded grimly. "We were wrong. Based on this notebook, Ryan stepped fully into his father's role after James died, and he's been using Mark's medical credentials since Mark was a resident, just as James had planned." My head was spinning. "You're saying James pushed Mark toward medicine not because he wanted his son to succeed, but to have access to prescription drugs for their operation?" "It appears that way," Greg confirmed, turning the notebook pages carefully. "Ryan writes here about the old man's master plan, positioning one son in medicine, the other in finance. The perfect combination for their business." "Mark idolized his father," I whispered, thinking of the few photos my husband kept of James, how he still spoke of him with a mixture of frustration and reverence. "This will destroy him." "Which is why we need to handle this carefully," Greg said, his professional demeanor returning. "I've arranged to meet an FBI contact tonight. Someone who specializes in public corruption cases. Until then, we keep this notebook secure and speak of this to no one else." I nodded, then remembered my phone. "I need to call Mark. Let him know I arrived safely." Linda handed me their landline rather than using my cell, another security precaution. When Mark answered, the relief in his voice was palpable. "Emma? Thank God. Are you at Mom's?" "Yes, with Linda and Greg. I've shown them the notebook. Greg's arranged a meeting with FBI contacts tonight." "Good," Mark said. "The kids are home from school now. Everything's quiet here. The police are still outside." I wanted to tell him about his father, to prepare him somehow for the devastating revelation, but couldn't bring myself to do it over the phone. "Mark, there's more in the notebook than we realized. Things about your family, but we should discuss it when I get back." There was a pause, then Mark's voice, suddenly wary. "What kind of things?" Before I could answer, I heard a commotion in the background. A crash, Sarah's scream, Daniel shouting something I couldn't make out. "Mark?" My heart raced. "Mark, what's happening?" "Someone's trying to break in," he said, his voice tight with fear. "The back door. I need to get the kids to safety. Call Detective Anderson." The line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, ice flooding my veins. "Emma?" Greg was beside me instantly. "What's wrong?" "Someone's at the house," I managed to say. "Breaking in. Mark and the children." Greg took the phone from my hand and dialed 911, quickly explaining the situation and demanding immediate response to my address. Then he called someone else, his FBI contact, speaking in clipped, urgent tones about a situation in progress related to the case they'd discussed. Linda guided me to a chair, her arm around my shoulders. "The police will get there in time. Mark will protect the children." But all I could think about was my family, alone and in danger, while I was 1,000 miles away with the very evidence Ryan had come back to find. I should never have left them. I should have stayed, found another way to get the notebook to authorities. "I need to go back," I said, standing abruptly. "Now." Greg ended his call. "Emma, the best thing you can do for your family right now is stay here where it's safe. The FBI is sending agents to your home. They'll coordinate with local police." "But what if the local police are compromised?" I argued. "What if Detective Anderson is CA from the notebook?" "That's exactly why FBI agents are being sent," Greg said firmly. "They'll secure the scene regardless of local involvement. But we need to assume all communications might be monitored now. No more calls to the house." The next hour was the longest of my life. Greg made call after call, using his extensive law enforcement contacts to monitor the situation unfolding in Riverside. Linda made fresh coffee that no one drank. I paced the living room, jumping every time the phone rang. Finally, Greg's FBI contact called back. I watched Greg's face as he listened, trying to read the news from his expression. When he hung up, his relief was visible. Police responded to the break-in, he reported. The intruder fled before they arrived. Mark and the children are unharmed, though shaken. They're being moved to a secure location now. My knees went weak with relief. Was it Ryan? They don't know yet, Greg admitted. Mark didn't get a clear look at the intruder, but given the timing, it seems likely. I need to speak to them, I insisted. Greg shook his head. Not yet. For their safety and yours, it's better if there's no contact until they're at the safe house. My contact will call again once they're secure. The waiting continued. Linda tried to distract me with photo albums, with food I couldn't eat, with reassurances that felt hollow given what we now knew about her past deceptions. As night fell, Greg prepared to leave for his meeting with FBI agents. I'll take the notebook, he said, carefully placing it in a locked briefcase. You stay here, with Linda. Keep the doors locked. Don't answer for anyone but me. After he left, Linda and I sat in uncomfortable silence. There were so many questions I wanted to ask her. About James, about what she knew of Ryan's activities, about how she could have kept such secrets from Mark for so many years. But I held back, focusing instead on my own guilt at having left my family vulnerable. I should have seen it, Linda said suddenly, breaking the silence. When Ryan moved in with you for just a week, and then stayed. I should have recognized the pattern. It's what James used to do. Find people to take him in, use their homes as bases of operation. I looked at her sharply. You knew Ryan was staying with us. You never warned us. I thought he was just having marital problems, she defended. Like he said. When Mark told me Ryan was sober, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe he'd finally escaped his father's influence. Mark deserved to know the truth about his father, I said, unable to keep the anger from my voice. He's spent his life trying to be the man his father never was. And all this time he was becoming exactly the man his father wanted him to be. Linda finished quietly. A respected doctor with access to prescription medications. I know. Why do you think I encouraged him to specialize in emergency medicine rather than pain management, which was his initial interest? I was trying to steer him away from the specialty that would have made him most useful to their operation. I hadn't known this about Mark's early career choices. You could have told him why. And shatter his image of his father? Break his heart? Linda shook her head. I couldn't do it. And once James was gone, I thought it was over. I really did. But it wasn't over, I said. It was just beginning. And now my children are in danger because of secrets you chose to keep. Linda flinched as if I'd slapped her. You're right, she whispered. This is my fault. All of it. Before I could respond, before I could either soften or sharpen the blow of my words, the landline rang. Linda answered it, then handed it to me wordlessly. Emma! Mark's voice, tense but steady. Mark, are you and the children? All right. What happened? We're safe, he assured me. At a hotel with FBI agents. The kids are scared but unharmed. Someone broke through the back door, but the police arrived before they got far into the house. Emma, it was Ryan. The officers identified him from the security cameras. I closed my eyes, relief and fear battling within me. Did they catch him? No. He escaped through the Johnsons' yard. But they have a description now, and they're searching the area. Emma, Ryan left something behind, a flash drive. The FBI agents found it on the kitchen counter after he fled. He left it deliberately? It seems that way. They're analyzing it now, but... Emma, one of the agents said it contains videos of me. I frowned, confused. What kind of videos? I don't know yet. They won't let me see them until they've reviewed everything. His voice dropped. But they said the videos appear to show me writing prescriptions, accessing medication storage areas at the hospital, dates going back years. That's impossible, I said immediately. You wouldn't. I know, Mark interrupted. But the agent said the footage looks convincing. They think Ryan may have been gathering material to frame me if he ever needed leverage. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. The surveillance photos in his bag. Some of them were of you at the hospital. Apparently so. Mark sounded exhausted. Emma, I spoke with Greg briefly. He told me about my father. I held my breath, wishing I could be there with him for this conversation. Mark, I'm so sorry. All these years, he said, his voice breaking slightly. All these years I thought I was honoring his memory by becoming a doctor. And it turns out I was just following his script. No, I said firmly. You became a doctor to help people. Your motives were pure, regardless of his plans. Mark was silent for a moment. Maybe, but it doesn't change the fact that I've been used by my father, by my brother, to facilitate crimes that have hurt people. Crimes I never saw because I didn't want to see them. I thought of Linda, sitting across from me with tears streaming down her face. We believe what we need to believe about the people we love. That doesn't make us complicit in their deceptions. The FBI wants to use the notebook, Mark said, changing the subject abruptly. They want to set a trap for Ryan and his associates. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of trap? They want to leak information that the notebook is being kept in a specific location, somewhere they can control and monitor. Draw Ryan out. Catch him in the act of trying to retrieve it. Using the real notebook? The one Greg has? No, a replica. The original stays secure as evidence. But Ryan wouldn't know the difference until it was too late. I considered this plan, the potential risks and rewards. What about the children? What about you? We'd remain in protective custody until it's over. Emma, the agents believe this. Operation goes beyond Ryan, that there are high-level people involved who might try to disappear if they don't act quickly. This might be their best chance to round up everyone at once. What does Greg think? I asked, knowing his law enforcement experience made his opinion valuable. He's cautiously supportive. He'll discuss it more with you after his meeting. Tonight. We talked a while longer, Mark updating me on the children. Sarah had finally fallen asleep. Daniel was being brave but quiet, and the security measures in place at their hotel. Before we hung up, he said something that sent a chill through me. Emma, be careful with my mother. I love her, but she's kept secrets her whole life. There might be more she hasn't told us. After the call ended, I turned to find Linda watching. Me, her expression unreadable. They want to use the notebook as bait, I told her. She nodded slowly. James used to do that, use valuable items as bait to catch competitors or people who had crossed him. A bitter smile crossed her face. Like father, like son. Ryan learned well. You make it sound like you admire them, I said, disturbed. By her tone. Admire? No. But I understood them better than anyone. I lived with James Taylor for 20 years. I saw what he was capable of. She stood, moving to a decorative box on the mantel. There's something you should know, Emma. Something not even Greg is aware of. From the box, she removed a small key. James kept records of his own. Records that could expose people Ryan still works with. People in positions of power who would do anything to keep their involvement secret. She held out the key. This opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank in Riverside. Inside is a hard drive with everything James documented over the years. I stared at the key, then at my mother-in-law. You've had this all along? Why didn't you come forward with it when Ryan was arrested? Because as long as I had it, I had protection, she admitted. Insurance, James called it. If anything happened to me, the information would be released. It kept me safe after he died. I took the key, feeling its weight, the weight of more secrets, more evidence of corruption that had poisoned this family for generations. Does Ryan know about this? He suspects, Linda said. James told him there was insurance, but not where or what exactly. Ryan's been looking for it for years. That's part of why he moved in with you. He thought Mark might have it, or that it might be hidden somewhere in your home. The implications were staggering. Ryan hadn't just been hiding from Jessica or using our home as a convenient base. He'd been searching for this evidence the entire time. 6 months of living under our roof, of interacting with our children, all while systematically going through our belongings looking for his father's insurance. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Linda's face hardened with resolve. Because it's time this ended. All of it. James destroyed Ryan's life by drawing him into this world. I won't stand by and watch him destroy Mark's family, too. The front door opened and we both jumped, but it was only Greg returning from his meeting. His expression was grave as he entered the living room, taking in the scene. Linda standing near the mantel, me holding the small key. The FBI has agreed to the operation, he announced. They'll set up a sting using a replica of the notebook. Emma, they want you involved. Me? Why? Because Ryan will be suspicious if the notebook suddenly appears in a location with no connection to your family. But if word reaches him that you've returned to Riverside, that you've brought the evidence back with you, and he left the implication hanging. You want me to be the bait, I realized. Greg nodded solemnly. You would be heavily protected, of course. But yes, they need someone Ryan would believe might have the notebook. Someone he might approach. No, Linda interjected forcefully. It's too dangerous. Emma has children who need her. Greg looked at his wife in surprise, unused to such vehemence from her. Linda, the FBI will ensure her safety. This may be our best chance to end this. Definitively. There's another way, I said, holding up the key Linda had given me. Evidence James Taylor left behind. Evidence that could identify everyone involved in this operation, up to the highest levels. Greg stared at the key, then at Linda. What is this? As Linda explained about James's insurance, Greg's expression shifted from confusion to professional interest, to a kind of resigned understanding. He had been a federal agent long enough to recognize the value of what we were discussing, and the danger it represented. If this hard drive contains what you think it does, he said slowly, it could break the case wide open, but it also makes anyone who possesses it a target. I closed my fingers around the key. Then we used both, the notebook as bait in the FBI's sting operation, and this key as our insurance, just as James intended. Greg considered this for a long moment, then nodded. I'll need to inform my contacts about this development. It changes the operation parameters significantly. As he stepped outside to make his calls, Linda moved closer to me. Emma, are you sure about this? Putting yourself in Ryan's path is dangerous, no matter how much protection you have. I'm sure about one thing, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. This has to end. For Mark's sake, for my children, and even for Ryan. Whatever James started all those years ago, whatever corruption he set in motion, it stops with this generation. Linda's eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was a fierce pride behind them. You're braver than I ever was, she whispered. I should have stood up to James decades ago. Maybe if I had, Ryan wouldn't have followed his path. It's not too late to do the right thing now, I told her, surprising myself with a sudden compassion for this woman who had lived so long with such terrible secrets. Help us end this, for all our sakes. She straightened her shoulders, a determination in her bearing that reminded me unexpectedly of Mark. I will, whatever it takes. When Greg returned, his face was grim but resolute. It's arranged. The operation begins tomorrow. Emma, you'll fly back to Riverside in the morning. Agents will meet you at the airport, and you'll be wired and under surveillance at all times. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me despite the danger ahead. And the key? The safe deposit box? A separate team will secure that evidence independently. Two-pronged approach. If one fails, the other may still succeed. As Greg outlined the operation details, I found myself thinking of Ryan, the brother-in-law who had moved into our home just for a week 6 months ago. The man who had played with my children, fixed our leaky faucet, become part of our family while systematically betraying our trust. Was there anything real in his interactions with us? Any genuine affection beneath the deception? It didn't matter. Now. Whatever Ryan's true feelings, whatever complex mix of loyalty and criminality had driven his actions, he had made his choice. He had chosen to follow his father's path, to use his brother's credentials, to put his own family at risk. Tomorrow, I would return to Riverside. I would face the danger head-on, would do whatever necessary to protect my family and expose the truth. And when it was over, when Ryan and his associates were brought to justice, perhaps Mark could finally begin to reconcile the father he thought he knew with the truth of who James Taylor really was. As I prepared for bed in Linda and Greg's guest room, I found myself thinking of the guest room in my own home, the space Ryan had occupied for 6 months, where I'd found the evidence that had set all this in motion. What I'd found in his room hadn't just left my husband speechless. It had unraveled a family legacy of deception spanning decades. Tomorrow would determine whether that legacy ended with exposure and justice, or whether it would claim more victims in its unfolding. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, I clung to the hope that truth, however painful, would finally set this family free. The Florida sunrise cast long shadows across the tarmac as I boarded the small charter plane the FBI had arranged. No commercial flights, no security cameras, no passenger manifests, complete operational security. Agent Rivera, a stern-faced woman with 20 years of experience in undercover operations, sat beside me, reviewing the plan one final time. Once we land at the private airstrip outside Riverside, you'll be taken directly to the safe house, she explained. There, we'll fit you with a wire and tracking device. The replica notebook has been prepared with the exact same appearance as the original, down to the most minute details. I nodded, my throat dry. And Mark? The children? Still in protective custody at an undisclosed location, she assured me. They'll remain there until the operation is complete. And the safe deposit box? Linda's key? Agent Rivera's expression remained carefully neutral. A separate team is handling that evidence. For your safety, the operations are compartmentalized. The fewer people who know all the details, the better. The plane taxied down the runway, gathering speed until we were airborne, Florida's coastline shrinking beneath us. I hadn't slept more than a few restless hours, my mind racing with what lay ahead. Linda's revelations about James Taylor had changed everything I thought I knew about my husband's family. The legacy of deception ran deeper than any of us had imagined. Agent Rivera? I said after we'd reached cruising altitude. What happens if Ryan doesn't take the bait? What if he suspects it's a trap? Then we move to contingency plans, she replied. But our intelligence suggests he's desperate to retrieve that notebook. With his escape from custody, he's now a fugitive with limited options. He needs to silence the evidence against him and his associates. And if he does approach me, what then? Rivera's eyes met mine. You stick to the script. You tell him you're willing to exchange the notebook for your family's safety. You arrange a meeting at the location we've prepared. Then you let us handle the rest. It sounded simple in theory. In practice, I would be face-to-face with a man who had betrayed my family, who might be willing to do anything to protect himself and his operation. A man who, despite everything, was still my husband's brother. What about Detective Anderson? I asked. The notebook mentioned payments to someone with his initials. We're monitoring all local law enforcement involved in the case, Rivera said carefully. If there's corruption, we'll uncover it. But until then, we proceed as if the threat could come from any direction. The flight lasted just over 2 hours, landing at a small private airstrip where 3 unmarked SUVs waited. I was ushered into the middle vehicle, sandwiched between Agent Rivera and another agent whose name I never caught. We drove through unfamiliar back roads, avoiding main highways and populated areas, until we reached a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of Riverside. Inside, a team of agents was already at work, setting up surveillance equipment and communication systems. Tech specialist named Dawson fitted me with a nearly invisible wire, explaining its capabilities and limitations. The range is about half a mile, he said, adjusting the small receiver taped between my shoulder blades. The battery will last 36 hours. There's a panic button here. He showed me a small device disguised as a tube of lip balm. Press it 3 times rapidly if you're in immediate danger. Another agent handed me the replica notebook. It was a perfect copy, down to the worn edges and coffee stain on page 34. I flipped through it, marveling at the detailed reproduction of Ryan's handwriting, the identical entries documenting years of criminal activity. Satellite photos show no unusual activity at your house, Agent Rivera reported, joining me in what had become the operations command center. The police tape has been removed as requested to make it appear that the investigation has moved elsewhere. So now we wait, I said, setting down the notebook. Rivera nodded. We've arranged for a controlled leak of information. A source will tip off one of Ryan's known associates that you've returned to Riverside and brought something valuable with you. From there, it's a matter of time. Time. The one thing I couldn't shake was the feeling that we didn't have enough of it. Somewhere in Riverside, Ryan was watching, waiting, planning his next move. And despite all the FBI's preparations, I couldn't quiet the voice in my head warning me that we were missing something important. I want to call Mark, I said suddenly, before this goes any further. Rivera hesitated, then nodded to an agent, manning the communications equipment. 2 minutes, secure line. Mark answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. Emma, are you back? Yes, I said, relief flooding through me at the sound of his voice. At the safe house. How are the kids? Holding up. Sarah's been having nightmares, but the agents have been kind. They gave her a teddy bear wearing an FBI jacket. His attempt at lightness fell flat, tension evident in every word. Emma, I've been thinking about what my mother told you. About my father. I glanced at the agents around me, all pretending not to listen. We can talk about that when this is over. That's just it, Mark said, his voice dropping. What if it's never really over? What if this is just the beginning of unraveling a lifetime of lies? One thing at a time, I said firmly. First, we deal with Ryan and his associates. Then we can face the past together. There was a pause. Then Mark spoke again, his voice strained. The FBI agents showed me those videos Ryan had on the flash drive. They're convincing. Me writing prescriptions, accessing medication storage, except I have no memory of any of it. My stomach tightened. What are you saying? They think Ryan may have been drugging me, Mark said, the words coming in a rush. Periodic low doses of something that would make me compliant, suggestible, but leave no clear memory afterward. Blood tests show traces of a benzodiazepine compound in my system. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Ryan hadn't just been using Mark's credentials, he'd been using Mark himself, manipulating him chemically to participate in crimes he would have no memory of committing. Mark, that's... Time's up, Agent Rivera said quietly, gesturing for me to end the call. I have to go, I told Mark quickly. I love you. We'll get through this. I love you too, he replied. Be careful, Emma. Ryan isn't the only one we need to worry about. The line went dead before I could ask what he meant. I handed the phone back to the communications agent, my mind reeling with this new information. If Ryan had been drugging Mark, making him an unwitting accomplice, the level of betrayal went even deeper than we'd imagined. We need to adjust the operation parameters, Rivera said after I shared what Mark had told me. If Wilson was able to drug a medical professional without detection, he's more sophisticated than we initially assessed. The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Agents came and went. Reports were delivered in hushed tones. Surveillance positions were established around my house. As evening approached, there was still no sign of Ryan or his associates taking the bait. Maybe he's more cautious than we thought, Agent Rivera mused, studying satellite imagery of the neighborhood. Or he doesn't trust his source. Or he's waiting for darkness, I suggested. Ryan always was a night owl. At 8 p.m., I was driven to my house in an unmarked car. The plan was simple. I would appear to return home, alone and vulnerable, carrying the replica notebook. FBI agents would be positioned in surveillance throughout the neighborhood, watching for Ryan's approach. The house felt different as I walked through the front door. Violation hung in the air, not just from Ryan's break-in attempt, but from the months he had lived here under false pretenses. I moved through the rooms, turning on lights, making my presence obvious to anyone watching. In the kitchen, I deliberately placed the replica notebook on the counter, then busied myself making tea I had no intention of drinking. The wire against my skin felt suddenly itchy, the weight of the surveillance oppressive despite being for my protection. Hours passed. I pretended to watch television, to read a book, all while staying within sight of windows where observers could see me. Just after midnight, I made a show of yawning, stretching, and heading upstairs to the master bedroom. Still no movement, Rivera's voice came through the nearly invisible earpiece I wore. We'll maintain positions overnight. I changed into pajamas, careful not to disturb the wire, and slipped into bed. Sleep was out of the question, but I needed to maintain the pretense of normalcy. As I lay in the darkness, I thought about Mark's warning. Ryan isn't the only one we need to worry about. What had he meant? Who else posed a threat? The sound came just after 2 a.m., a faint scraping at the back door, barely audible even in the silent house. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Movement at the rear of the house, Rivera's voice whispered in my ear. Stay in position. Do not engage. I remained motionless in bed, straining to hear. The soft click of the back door opening, then closing. Footsteps, too light to be Ryan's, moving through the kitchen. A woman's voice, barely audible, speaking. Into what sounded like a phone or radio. I'm in. Searching for the target now. Not Ryan. Someone else. The realization sent icy fear through my veins. Rivera and her team had prepared for Ryan, expected Ryan. This was something else entirely. Unknown female subject has entered the residence, Rivera reported tensely in my ear. Emma, remain in your room. We're moving teams into position. But curiosity and fear propelled me out of bed. Moving silently to the bedroom door, I opened it just enough to peer down the hallway. From this vantage point, I could see a sliver of the kitchen, enough to glimpse a figure moving methodically through drawers and cabinets. Then the figure stepped fully into view, and I had to stifle a gasp of recognition. Jessica, Ryan's estranged wife. She looked different from when I'd last seen her, hair dyed dark, dressed entirely in black, moving with a confidence and purpose that seemed utterly foreign to the woman I thought I knew. In her hand was the replica notebook, which she was flipping through with increasing agitation. It's not the original, she hissed into what I now could see was a small radio. Taylor must have hidden it somewhere else. A voice crackled back, too faint for me to make out the words. Jessica responded, No, I'll search the rest of the house. She has to have it somewhere. Emma. Rivera's voice was urgent in my ear. The subject is Jessica Wilson, Ryan's wife. She appears to be working with someone. We're going to move in and— A sudden movement at the back door cut off her words. Another figure entered the kitchen. Tall, male, familiar even in this dim light. Ryan. Jess, he said, his voice carrying up the stairs. We need to hurry. This doesn't feel right. Jessica turned to him, holding up the notebook. It's a fake, Ryan. A perfect copy, but definitely not the original. Ryan swore softly, taking the notebook and examining it. She's setting us up. I knew it was too easy. Then let's get out of here, Jessica urged. Before— The rest of her sentence was drowned out by the sudden crash of the front door being breached, followed by shouts of, FBI! Freeze! Brilliant light flooded the house as agents stormed in from multiple entry points. I shrank back into the bedroom, following the safety protocol I'd been given. Through the crack in the door, I could see the chaos unfolding. Agents in tactical gear securing the kitchen, Ryan and Jessica raising their hands, then Ryan making a sudden break for the back door. 2 agents tackled him before he made it, halfway, driving him to the ground with enough force to make the floor shake. Jessica didn't resist, her expression oddly calm as agents handcuffed and searched her. Emma, stay where you are until we clear the scene, Rivera instructed through my earpiece. We've secured both subjects. Minutes later, Rivera herself came upstairs to escort me down. The living room had been transformed into a temporary processing area, with Ryan and Jessica seated separately, each surrounded by agents. Ryan's face was pressed against the dining table, a tactical officer standing over him. Jessica sat rigidly in an armchair, her expression unreadable. Well, this is unexpected, Agent Rivera murmured, steering me toward the kitchen, away from the Wilsons. Jessica wasn't on our radar as an active participant. She was supposed to be in Westlake at her sister's, I said, still processing the shock of seeing her here. She told me she was afraid of Ryan. Apparently not, Rivera said dryly. Based on their radio communications, they've been working together the entire time. Ryan's voice suddenly rose from the living room. I want to talk to Emma. Emma! Rivera shook her head. Not happening. But I felt a strange need for closure, to confront the man who had lived in our home, betrayed our trust, endangered my children. Let me speak to him, just for a minute. After a brief consultation with other agents, Rivera reluctantly agreed. 2 minutes. We'll be recording everything, and I'll be right beside you. Ryan looked smaller somehow, handcuffed to a dining chair, his designer clothes rumpled, a bruise forming on his cheek, where he'd been tackled. His eyes lit up when he saw me. Emma, he said, attempting a smile that came across as more of a grimace. This isn't what it looks like. Really? I stood just out of his reach, arms crossed. Because it looks like you broke into our home. Again. After trying to frame your brother for crimes you committed. Ryan's smile faded. Mark was never supposed to be implicated. That was an insurance policy, nothing more. If he'd just voted against the audit like I asked, none of this would have happened. You drugged him, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You used your own brother as an unwitting accomplice. A flicker of something, guilt, regret, crossed Ryan's face. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I could clear my debts and get out from under Mercer's control. And Jessica? I glanced to where his wife sat, still calm, still unreadable. Was she part of this from the beginning? Ryan laughed humorlessly. Jess? She's been running the financial side for years. The whole estranged wife thing was a cover. We needed somewhere secure to operate from after our place got compromised. Your house was perfect. A respected doctor's home, nice neighborhood. No one would suspect. The casual way he admitted to using us made my blood boil. You lived with us for 6 months. You played with our children. Was any of it real, Ryan? Any of it at all? Something flickered in his eyes. A moment of genuine emotion breaking through the practiced facade. The kids, he said softly. I never wanted them involved. That part was real, Emma. I do care about them. Time's up, Rivera said, placing a hand on my shoulder. We need to process them for transport. As I turned to leave, Ryan called after me. Emma, the notebook won't protect you. Mercer already knows about the hard drive. He's been looking for it as long as I have. You need to… An agent cut him off, instructing him to remain silent. I froze, turning back slowly. What did you say about a hard drive? Ryan's eyes narrowed. You know exactly what I'm talking about. My father's insurance policy. Mom finally told you where it is, didn't she? Rivera was suddenly very alert. Beside me. What hard drive is he referring to? Before I could answer, the front door opened and Detective Anderson walked in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The FBI agents tensed visibly, hands moving to their weapons. Detective, Rivera acknowledged coolly, this is a federal operation. Your department was notified as a courtesy, not an invitation. Anderson surveyed the scene, his expression impossible to read. Just checking in, Agent. Making sure everything's proceeding smoothly. His eyes landed on Ryan, then shifted to Jessica, who gave him the slightest nod. In that moment, I remembered the notebook entries about payments to CA, Charles Anderson, and Mark's warning. Ryan isn't the only one we need to worry about. Detective Anderson, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm surprised to see you here personally. It's very late. I take a special interest in cases involving prominent local families, he replied, his gaze calculating as it moved from me to Ryan and back again. Especially when they involve escaped suspects and federal agencies operating in my jurisdiction. Rivera stepped forward, physically placing herself between Anderson and me. As I said, Detective, we have the situation under control. We'll coordinate with your department in the morning through official channels. A tense silence fell, broken only when one of Anderson's officers received a radio call. He stepped aside to respond, then returned to whisper something in Anderson's ear. The detective's expression darkened momentarily before he forced a smile. Well, it seems you do have things under control, he said finally. We'll leave you to it. But, Agent Rivera, I expect a full briefing tomorrow. This is still my city. As Anderson and his officers departed, I caught a significant look passing between him and Jessica. Something was happening beneath the surface, connections I couldn't quite grasp. We need to move now, Rivera said as soon as Anderson was gone. That wasn't a coincidence. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson, you're being transported to federal holding separately. As agents began preparing Ryan and Jessica for transport, my phone buzzed, with a text from an unknown number. First National Bank, now, CA knows. My blood ran cold. The safe deposit box, Linda's key. If Anderson was indeed CA from the notebook, and if he'd somehow learned about the hard drive. Agent Rivera, I said urgently, showing her the text. The separate team. The one handling the other evidence. They might be in danger. Rivera read the message, her expression hardening. Sierra team, report, she barked into her radio. The response was static. Sierra team, acknowledge. More static. What's happening? I asked, fear clawing at my throat. We've lost contact. With the team securing the safe deposit box, Rivera said grimly. And if Detective Anderson is compromised… She didn't need to finish the thought. The operation was unraveling. The second team could be walking into a trap, or might already have done so. We need to warn them, I insisted. Already trying. All channels. Rivera turned to her second-in-command. Finish processing these 2 and get them to the federal facility. Maximum security. No visitors. No calls. She faced me. You're coming with me. We need to secure that hard drive before Mercer's people get to it. 20 minutes later, we were in an unmarked car speeding toward First National Bank. Rivera driving while coordinating with other agents via her secure radio. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, the streets of Riverside eerily empty. The bank doesn't open until 9, I pointed out. We're not waiting, Rivera replied grimly. We have emergency authorization to access the premises. As we approached the bank, Rivera suddenly slowed, then pulled into a side street, killing the headlights. Something's wrong, she murmured, peering ahead. There's activity at the bank. Through the pre-dawn dimness, I could make out 2 vehicles parked near the bank's side entrance, a police cruiser and a dark sedan. Figures moved in the shadows, and the side door to the bank stood open. Anderson, Rivera said, confirming my fear. He moved faster than we anticipated. She reached for her radio. Control, this is Rivera. We have a situation at the bank. Local law enforcement, possibly compromised, has accessed the building, requesting immediate backup. Copy that, came the response. Units en route, ETA 15 minutes. We don't have 15 minutes, Rivera muttered, checking her weapon. If they get that hard drive. I clutched Linda's key in my pocket. What do we do? Rivera studied the scene for a long moment, weighing options. We observe until backup arrives. We're outnumbered, and if Anderson is working for Mercer, there could be others with him. We watched in tense silence as more movement occurred at the bank entrance. Detective Anderson emerged, followed by 2 men in suits I didn't recognize. Between them was a figure in handcuffs, slender, silver-haired, familiar even from this distance. Greg, I gasped. That's Greg, Mark's stepfather. Rivera raised her binoculars for a better look. Confirmed. They have Agent Wilson in custody. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. This just became a hostage situation with a federal agent. One of the suited men was carrying something, a small rectangular case that could easily contain a hard drive. Anderson checked his watch, said something to the others. Then they began moving toward their vehicles. They're leaving, I said urgently. They have the hard drive. Rivera made a split-second decision. Change of plans. We're going to follow them. They'll lead us to Mercer or whoever's running this operation. She started the car, keeping the lights off as she pulled out slowly, maintaining distance from Anderson's departing convoy. Control, update backup to our new GPS location. We are in pursuit of suspects with a federal agent hostage. We followed Anderson's vehicles through the quiet streets of Riverside, heading away from the city center toward the industrial district. The buildings grew more sparse, the streets less maintained. Finally, the convoy turned into what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse complex, stopping outside a nondescript building with blacked-out windows. Rivera parked a block away, out of sight. Backup is still 10 minutes out, she said, checking her tactical gear. I need you to stay in the vehicle, Emma. Under no circumstances are you to approach that building. But Greg is a trained federal agent who knew the risks, she cut me off. My priority now is securing that evidence and preventing its destruction. Before I could protest further, Rivera slipped out of the car, moving silently through the shadows toward the warehouse. I watched her disappear around a corner, my heart pounding in my chest. Despite her orders, I couldn't just sit here while Greg, family, regardless of our complicated history, was in danger. Making a decision I knew was foolish but felt necessary, I exited the car. Instead of following Rivera directly, I circled around the back of the adjacent building, looking for a less obvious approach. The warehouse complex was a maze of loading docks, abandoned equipment, and chain-link fencing. Through gaps between buildings, I could see Anderson's group entering the warehouse, Greg stumbling between his captors. A side door caught my attention. Rusted, half open, apparently forgotten. Careful to stay in the shadows, I made my way toward it. The door creaked slightly as I eased it open, revealing a dimly lit storage area filled with dusty crates and equipment. From somewhere deeper in the building, voices echoed, too distant to make out words, but tense in tone. I moved cautiously through the storage area, following the voices. The warehouse was larger than it appeared from outside, with a central, open space surrounded by offices and storage rooms. Crouching behind a stack of crates, I peered into the main area. Detective Anderson stood in the center of the room, the small case containing the hard drive on a table before him. Greg was seated in a chair, still handcuffed, a cut visible on his forehead. The two suited men stood guard, and a fourth figure paced nearby, a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and an air of authority that commanded the room. Victor Mercer. It had to be. "The encryption is military grade," Greg was saying, his voice steady despite his situation. "You won't break it without the password." Mercer smiled coldly. "Which is why you're here, Agent Wilson. I understand you were close to James Taylor. He would have trusted you with this information." Greg laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that seemed to irritate Mercer. James Taylor didn't trust anyone completely, not even his wife. "What makes you think he gave me the password?" "Because you married his widow," Mercer replied simply. "Because you've been protecting her all these years. Because James would have ensured his insurance policy remained viable after his death, and you were the logical custodian." I shifted slightly for a better view, accidentally dislodging a small piece of metal that clattered to the floor. The "why" sound, though small, echoed in the cavernous space. One of the suited men turned sharply, drawing his weapon. "Check it out," Anderson ordered. I shrank back behind the crates, heart thundering in my ears. Footsteps approached slowly, methodically. I looked desperately for an escape route, finding none that wouldn't expose me immediately. A sudden commotion from the opposite side of the warehouse saved me. Shouting, the sound of breaking glass. The footsteps near me reversed direction, hurrying back toward the center of the room. "We have a breach," one of the men called out. "East side." Rivera had made her move, creating a diversion. I used the chaos to change position, circling behind a different set of crates that offered a view of a new angle of the central area. From here, I could see another figure I hadn't noticed before, a woman, seated in the shadows beyond Mercer. As she leaned forward into the light, I recognized her immediately. Linda, Mark's mother, my mother-in-law. She appeared unharmed but frightened, her hands bound in front of her. "Enough of this," Mercer said sharply, drawing a pistol from inside his jacket. He pointed it at Linda. "The password, Agent Wilson, now, or James's widow dies first, then you." Greg's face hardened. "You know I can't." Mercer released the safety on his weapon. 3 seconds, 3, 2... "I have it," I called out, stepping from behind the crates before I could reconsider. "I know the password." All heads turned toward me. Anderson swore under his breath. Mercer's expression shifted from surprise to calculating interest. "Mrs. Taylor," he said smoothly, lowering his weapon slightly. "How unexpected. And how did you come to possess this information?" I moved slowly into the open area, hands raised to show I was unarmed. "Linda told me before you took her. Insurance against exactly this situation." It was a desperate bluff, but I needed to buy time until backup arrived. Linda's eyes widened slightly, but she had enough presence of mind not to contradict me. "Interesting," Mercer said, studying me with the cold assessment of a predator. "And you would share this password with us because I want my family safe," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "My husband, my children. I want this to end." Mercer gestured toward the hard drive. "Then by all means, Mrs. Taylor, end it." I approached the table slowly, mind racing. I had no password, no plan beyond creating a distraction. As I reached for the hard drive, I heard a faint sound from above, movement in the rafters. Glancing up, I caught a glimpse of tactical gear. FBI agents were in position. The password, I said, buying more time, is a phrase James used, something only family would know. Mercer's patience was clearly wearing thin. And that phrase is? From the corner of my eye, I saw Rivera position herself in a doorway, weapon ready. Other agents had surrounded the perimeter. Any second now. The password, I said clearly, locking eyes with Mercer, is federal agents. Freeze. As if on cue, the warehouse erupted in coordinated chaos. FBI agents descended from the rafters on tactical lines. Others breached doors and windows. Rivera and her team rushed in, weapons trained on Mercer and his men. FBI, down on the ground, now. Anderson went for his weapon but was tackled by 2 agents before he could draw it. One of Mercer's men managed to fire a single shot before being neutralized with a taser. Mercer himself stood perfectly still, hands raised in elegant surrender, his expression one of annoyed resignation rather than fear. In seconds, it was over. Mercer and his associates were face down on the concrete floor, being handcuffed and searched. Greg was being freed from his restraints. Linda rushed to his side. Rivera approached me, her expression a mix of anger and reluctant admiration. That was either the bravest or stupidest civilian intervention I've ever seen, she said, holstering her weapon. You disobeyed direct orders to stay in the vehicle. It worked out, I pointed out, adrenaline still coursing through my system. This time, she conceded. But don't make a habit of it. As agents secured the scene and medical personnel arrived to check Greg and Linda for injuries, Rivera carefully placed the hard drive case into an evidence bag. With this in the notebook, we have enough to dismantle Mercer's entire operation. The corruption, the prescription fraud, the identity theft, all of it exposed. I watched as Mercer was led away, his aristocratic bearing intact despite the handcuffs. He paused as he passed me, those cold eyes assessing me one final time. James would have approved of you, he said quietly. You have his resourcefulness. The comparison to my father-in-law, a man I'd never met but whose shadow had nearly destroyed my family, sent a chill through me. I am nothing like James Taylor, I replied firmly. Mercer smiled thinly. We all become what we fight against, Mrs. Taylor, sooner or later. As agents led him away, I turned to find Linda watching me, her expression unreadable. He's wrong, she said softly. You're nothing like James. You risked everything to protect your family. James only ever protected himself. The sun was fully risen by the time we left the warehouse, casting harsh light on the industrial wasteland around us. In the daylight, the danger seemed less immediate. The warehouse just another abandoned building, rather than the site of a confrontation that could have cost multiple lives. Rivera drove me directly to the safe house where Mark and the children were waiting. As we pulled up to the nondescript suburban home, the front door flew open, and Mark rushed out, followed closely by Daniel and Sarah. Emma! Sarah's voice, high and clear with relief, was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I gathered my daughter in my arms, feeling Mark's embrace encircle us both, Daniel joining the family huddle. It's over, I whispered, holding them tight. Really over. As agents debriefed Mark on the operation's success, I sat with the children in the safe house's small living room. Sarah curled against me, exhausted but unwilling to leave my side. Daniel, trying so hard to be grown up, finally allowed himself to rest his head on my shoulder. Will Uncle Ryan go to jail? Sarah asked in a small voice. I stroked her hair gently. Yes, sweetheart. He did some very bad things, and now he has to face the consequences. But he was nice to us, she insisted, confusion evident in her young face. People can be complicated, I said carefully. They can do both good and bad things. The important part is that we're safe now, and Uncle Ryan can't hurt anyone anymore. Daniel, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. Dad said Grandpa James was a criminal too, that it's like a family curse. I turned to look at my son, seeing the worry in his eyes, the fear that somehow this curse might touch him too. There's no such thing as family curses, Daniel. We all make our own choices. Your father chose to be a doctor who helps people. I chose to be a teacher. You and Sarah will make your own choices too. Not bad ones, Sarah declared with the certainty of an 8-year-old. Not bad ones, I agreed, hugging them both. T. joined us sitting on the coffee table facing his family. The strain of the past days showed in the new lines around his eyes, in the weary set of his shoulders. But there was something else there too. A clarity, a resolution. The FBI says we can go home tomorrow, he announced. The house has been cleared and secured. And he hesitated, meeting my eyes. They've confirmed what we suspected about my father, and about Ryan drugging me to use my credentials. But Daniel's head came up sharply. Someone drugged you, Dad? Mark nodded, choosing honesty over protection. Yes. Uncle Ryan put something in my food or drink sometimes that made me do things I wouldn't normally do, like write prescriptions for medications that were being sold illegally. That's why you weren't in trouble with the hospital, I realized. The blood tests proved you weren't a willing participant. The chief of staff called personally, Mark confirmed. My privileges will be fully restored once the investigation is complete. It might take time to rebuild trust with some colleagues, but he shrugged. One day at a time. As the children finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep on the sofa, Mark and I moved to the kitchen to talk privately. My mother? He asked immediately. She's fine, shaken, but physically unharmed. Greg too. I hesitated. Mark, there's something you should know. Your mother was being held as leverage against Greg. Mercer thought James might have given him the password to the hard drive because he married Linda. Mark frowned. Why would my father give his insurance policy password to Greg? He wouldn't, I said gently. But there's more to their relationship than we knew. Linda and Greg. They knew each other before your father died. They may have been involved while she was still married to James. 2 months after the warehouse raid, our house finally began to feel like home again. The guest room had been completely remodeled. New paint, new furniture, even new flooring, erasing all physical reminders of Ryan's presence. Some memories, however, couldn't be renovated away so easily. Mark stood in the doorway of the freshly transformed space, his expression thoughtful. It looks good, he said, sliding an arm around my waist. Sarah wants to use it as an art studio. I leaned into his embrace. I think that's perfect. Fill it with creativity and light. The weeks following Mercer's arrest had brought wave after wave of revelations as the FBI unraveled decades of corruption. Victor Mercer, it turned out, had been running his operation for nearly 30 years, first as a rogue DEA agent, then as the invisible head of a network that stretched across 3 states. Detective Anderson had been on his payroll for over a decade, along with judges, prosecutors, and other law enforcement officials. Ryan and Jessica remained in federal custody, both facing dozens of charges. According to Agent Rivera, who still checked in occasionally, they had begun cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. The notebook and James Taylor's hard drive had provided enough evidence to secure indictments against 37 people connected to Mercer's organization. "Dad!" Daniel called from downstairs. "Grandma and Greg are here." Mark tensed slightly, beside me. His relationship with his mother remained complicated, the revelations about her past creating a distance that was slowly, very slowly, beginning to heal. "Ready?" I asked softly. He nodded, squeezing my hand. One more Sunday dinner. One day at a time. Downstairs, Linda was already in the kitchen, arranging a bouquet of flowers she'd brought. At 65, she looked older than her years now, the events of the past months having taken their toll. Greg stood awkwardly by the door, still more comfortable in the role of law enforcement than family member. Emma, Linda greeted me with a careful hug. The house looks wonderful. Thanks for coming, I said, meaning it despite the lingering complexity between us. Whatever her past mistakes, Linda was making genuine efforts to rebuild trust with her son and grandchildren. Sarah bounded into the kitchen, waving a drawing. Grandma, look what I made in art class. Linda's face softened as she examined the colorful creation. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that our family? Sarah nodded enthusiastically. That's you and Grandpa Greg, and Mom and Dad, and me and Daniel, and even Megan, because she's like family, too. I caught Mark's eye across the room, sharing a moment of gratitude for our daughter's resilient spirit. Children, I had learned, possessed an extraordinary capacity for healing and moving forward. Greg cleared his throat. I brought something for Daniel. He held out a model airplane kit. Thought we might work on it together sometime. Daniel, emerging from the living room with his ever-present headphones around his neck, accepted the gift with unexpected warmth. Cool. Maybe after dinner? The tension in Greg's shoulders eased visibly. These small moments of connection were how we were rebuilding, one tentative step at a time. The doorbell rang, and I went to welcome Megan, who arrived bearing a bottle of wine and her signature blunt humor. The gang's all here, she announced, scanning the assembled family. No federal agents hiding in the bushes today? No criminal brothers-in-law in the guest room? How disappointingly normal. I laughed, grateful as always for her ability to diffuse tension with irreverence. Just a regular family dinner. Boring, right? After everything you've been through, you've earned boring. She handed me the wine. Besides, I bring news that might disrupt the boredom slightly. Intrigued, I raised an eyebrow. Oh? Let's get everyone seated first. It's a dinner-time announcement kind of thing. As we gathered around the table, a new one, the old dining set having too many uncomfortable memories attached, the conversation flowed more easily than I'd expected. Linda shared stories from her volunteer work at the community center, a new chapter she'd begun as part of her personal redemption. Greg, gradually warming up, talked about consulting with the FBI on other corruption cases, his expertise now valued in official channels rather than kept as a family secret. Mark, too, was healing. Bayside Hospital had welcomed him back after a brief administrative leave, his colleagues rallying around him once the full story became public. The betrayal of his brother and the revelations about his father had hit him hard, but therapy was helping him process the complex legacy he'd inherited. So, Megan said as we finished the main course, time for my news. She set down her fork with dramatic emphasis. The FBI has officially closed the case file on Victor Mercer's organization. Final sentencing recommendations were submitted. Yesterday? Greg nodded. I heard. Mercer's looking at 30 years minimum. No possibility of parole. What about Ryan and Jessica? Mark asked quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken his brother's name at the dinner table. Megan glanced at the children, then at me, silently asking how much to share. It's okay, I said. We've been honest with them all along. Age-appropriately, but honest. Ryan accepted a plea deal, Megan explained. 15 years. Jessica got 12. Their cooperation helped bring down some of Mercer's higher-level associates. Mark absorbed this information in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he asked, will they serve their full sentences? Barring extraordinary circumstances, yes, Greg interjected. The federal prosecutor was quite adamant about that. Given the extent of their crimes and the length of time they were involved. Sarah, who had been listening with the solemn attention of a child trying to understand adult matters, asked, will we ever see Uncle Ryan again? The table fell silent. Mark and I had discussed this possibility but hadn't reached a firm conclusion. How do you explain to a child the complexity of loving someone who has betrayed you, of setting boundaries while allowing for the possibility of redemption? I don't know, sweetheart, Mark answered honestly. Uncle Ryan needs to face the consequences of his choices first. But people can change. After his time in prison, if he's truly sorry and has become a better person, maybe then we can think about it. Daniel, more cynical at his age, scoffed. He drugged you, Dad. He put all of us in danger. Why would we ever want to see him again? Mark considered his son thoughtfully. Because forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened, Daniel. It's about not letting the hurt define our future. It doesn't mean forgetting or even trusting again. It means freeing ourselves from the weight of anger. Your father's right, Linda said softly. I spent too many years carrying secrets and resentments. It's a heavy burden that changes who you are. The conversation shifted then to lighter topics. Daniel's upcoming soccer tournament, Sarah's art show at school, plans for a family camping. Trip now that the protective security detail was finally deemed unnecessary. Looking around the table, I felt a wave of gratitude for this imperfect, wounded, healing family. After dinner, as promised, Greg and Daniel retreated to the living room to begin work on the model airplane. Linda and Sarah washed dishes together, the grandmother teaching her granddaughter a song from her own childhood. Mark stepped outside, onto the back porch, and I followed, sensing he needed a moment of quiet reflection. The evening air was cool, stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Mark stood at the railing, looking out at the yard where his children played, where family barbecues had been held, where normalcy was slowly being reclaimed. 15 years, he said as I joined him. Ryan will be almost 60 when he gets out. I slipped my hand into his. How do you feel about that? Mark considered the question carefully. Relieved, sad, angry still sometimes, but mostly. I feel like I can finally stop looking over my shoulder, wondering what other secrets might be waiting to explode our lives. The FBI is confident they've uncovered everything, I reminded him. Your father's hard drive was remarkably thorough. James Taylor, meticulous record keeper of his own crimes, Mark said with a bitter laugh. What a legacy. That's not your legacy, I said firmly. You've created your own. Dr. Mark Taylor, who saves lives, loving father, husband who stood by his family through unimaginable circumstances. He turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. When I think about how close we came to losing everything. But we didn't, I reminded him. We're still here, changed maybe, wiser definitely, but still us. Inside, we could hear Sarah's laughter mingling with Linda's, Daniel's voice animatedly discussing airplane mechanics with Greg. Megan called something from the kitchen about dessert, the sounds of family, damaged but enduring, complicated but genuine. Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, then showed me the screen. A notification from the security system we'd installed after everything happened. Motion detected at front door. For a moment, old fears resurfaced. Then the notification updated. Package delivered. Still jumpy, Mark admitted with a self-deprecating smile. It's only been 2 months, I said. Give yourself time. He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I was going to wait for our anniversary next month, but maybe now is better. Inside the box was a silver pendant, simple and elegant, engraved with a single word, resilience. Emma Taylor, Mark said, his voice steady as he fastened the necklace around my throat. You are the strongest person I know. When our world was falling apart, you never broke. You fought for our family, faced down danger, uncovered the truth. This seemed more fitting than diamonds. Tears pricked at my eyes as my fingers traced the engraved word. It's perfect. We stood together on the porch, watching night settle over our neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Mark had a hospital board meeting to discuss. strengthened security protocols for prescription medications. I had a tenure committee interview at the college. Daniel needed help with a science project, and Sarah had a dentist appointment. Normal life, with its ordinary complications and mundane responsibilities. After months of crisis, ordinary had never felt so precious. "We should go back in," Mark said eventually, "before they send a search party." "In a minute," I replied, savoring the peaceful moment. "I'm just grateful for this, for us." As we turned to go inside, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the patio door glass. Two people, standing close, weathered but whole. 6 months ago, my brother-in-law had moved in, just for a week, setting in motion events that would test every bond, reveal long-buried secrets, and ultimately strengthen the foundations of what mattered most. What I'd found in Ryan's room hadn't just left my husband speechless. It had forced us to confront deceptions that had shadowed his family for generations. But in that confrontation, in the painful exposure of long-hidden truths, we had found something unexpected: freedom. The door closed behind us as we rejoined our family, leaving the darkness outside where it belonged. 3 weeks later, I stood in the newly redecorated guest room that had become Sarah's art studio, helping her organize her supplies. Sunlight streamed through the windows we'd enlarged during the renovation, illuminating the space that had once held so many secrets. "Mom," Sarah said, arranging colored pencils in a jar. "I had a dream about Uncle Ryan last night." I paused, giving her my full attention. "What kind of dream, sweetheart?" She frowned slightly, concentrating. "He was sitting in a room with no windows, drawing pictures like I do. But he seemed sad." I sat on the small stool beside her. "That's probably pretty close to what his life is like now. Prison doesn't have many windows." Sarah considered this. "Do you think he has colored pencils? For drawing?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Prison isn't designed to be comfortable." "Maybe we could send him some," she suggested. "Not the good ones, just the regular kind." The simple compassion of children never ceased to amaze me. "Would that make you feel better? Sending Uncle Ryan some drawing supplies?" She nodded. "Dad said people can change if they're really sorry. Maybe drawing pretty things would help. Uncle Ryan be sorry faster." I hugged her, this resilient child who could still find room for kindness amid the wreckage of betrayal. "We can talk to Dad about it. It's a thoughtful idea." Later, I mentioned Sarah's suggestion to Mark as we prepared dinner together. His hands stilled on the cutting board. "Colored pencils for Ryan," he repeated, testing the concept. "What do you think about that?" I chose my words carefully. I think Sarah's processing in her own way. She's trying to make sense of how someone who was kind to her could also do such terrible things. The pencils are her attempt at reconciliation. Mark resumed chopping vegetables. We agreed we'd let the kids guide their own relationship, or lack thereof, with Ryan going forward. If sending art supplies helps Sarah, I won't object. "And you?" I asked gently. "Have you thought about whether you'll ever contact him?" "Every day," he admitted. "Some days I draft letters in my head. Other days I can barely say his name without feeling sick." He scraped the vegetables into a bowl. "My therapist says there's no timeline for this process." "She's right," I agreed. "Whatever you decide, whenever you decide it, I'll support you." Mark smiled, a genuine one that reached his eyes. "I know, that's never been in question." The doorbell rang and Daniel called from the living room. "I got it!" We heard the door open, followed by Daniel's voice raised in greeting. "Aunt Claire, hi!" My sister appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking elegant as always in her corporate attire, clearly having come directly from her office. "Surprise visit," she announced. "I was in the neighborhood for a client meeting and thought I'd stop by." I embraced her, surprised but pleased. Claire had been a steadfast support during the aftermath of Ryan's arrest, helping with the children and bringing meals when we were too overwhelmed to manage basic tasks. Perfect timing. Stay for dinner? Love to, she agreed, setting down her briefcase. Actually, I have some news I wanted to share in person. We settled in the living room with glasses of iced tea while dinner finished cooking. Claire, ever the organized attorney, pulled a folder from her briefcase. So I've been doing some digging, she began, about Jessica Wilson's background before she married Ryan. Mark leaned forward, immediately interested. What prompted this? Something bothered me during your whole ordeal, Claire explained. The way Jessica seemed to be playing multiple angles, contacting Emma as the concerned wife, while actually working with Ryan the whole time. She opened the folder. It turns out, Jessica Campbell, her maiden name, worked for a pharmaceutical company called Meridian Health 10 years ago. Okay, I said, not yet seeing the significance. Meridian Health was investigated for illegal distribution practices, Claire continued. The case fell apart when key evidence disappeared. The lead investigator on that case? A young DEA agent named Victor Mercer. Mark and I exchanged glances, connecting the dots. You think Jessica was Mercer's plant from the beginning? Mark asked. That she married Ryan as part of their operation? Claire nodded. It's circumstantial, but the timing fits. Jessica and Ryan met right after the Meridian case collapsed. Mercer was forced out of the DEA a year later under suspicion of corruption. What better way to maintain control over your operation than to place someone you trust inside the family business? The implications were disturbing. Ryan had been betrayed as thoroughly as he had betrayed others. Does Ryan know this? I asked. I don't think so, Claire replied, closing the folder. The FBI is investigating now, based on information I provided. It might give Ryan additional leverage in his cooperation agreement if he can claim he was manipulated by Jessica. Mark ran a hand through his hair, processing this new information. It doesn't excuse what he did. No, Claire agreed, but it adds another layer to understand why he did it. After Claire left, the children settled in bed. Mark and I sat on the back porch again, our evening ritual of quiet reflection before sleep. The night air carried the scent of the jasmine I'd planted along the fence, new life taking root. If Claire is right about Jessica, Mark said, breaking the comfortable silence, then Ryan's judgment was compromised from the beginning. He thought he was escaping our father's influence by marrying her, when actually he was just falling deeper into Mercer's web. People rarely see the traps they're walking into, I observed, especially when they're disguised as love. Mark took my hand, tracing the lines of my palm thoughtfully. When Ryan first showed up at our door 6 months ago, I thought I was helping him, giving him a safe haven during a marital crisis. All along, he was the danger, and I invited him in. You couldn't have known, I reminded him. You saw what you expected to see, your brother in need. That's not weakness, Mark. It's humanity. And what about now? He asked quietly. What do I see now when I think of him? I waited, giving him space to find his own answer. I see someone I used to know, he said finally. Someone who shares my blood but not my values. Someone who made terrible choices but might someday find his way back to something better. He looked at me, vulnerability clear in his eyes. Is that naive? No, I said firmly. It's hope, and hope is never naive. It's the most courageous thing we can offer in the face of betrayal. The next day, we took Sarah shopping for art supplies, not just for her studio, but also a basic set of colored pencils and a sketchbook to send to Ryan. As she carefully selected which colors to include, deliberating with the seriousness only an 8-year-old could bring to such a task, I was struck by how healing sometimes comes from unexpected sources. Not the red, she decided, putting one pencil back. Prison has enough red, more greens and blues, like outside. Mark, watching nearby, blinked rapidly against sudden emotion. That's thoughtful, Sarah. She looked up at her father solemnly. Will you write a letter to go with them? So Uncle Ryan knows they're from us? A complex series of emotions crossed Mark's face. Yes, I think I can do that. That evening, while Sarah was at her dance class with Daniel waiting in the bayi, parents lounged doing homework, Mark sat at the kitchen table with a blank note card and the package of art supplies. He had been staring at the empty page for nearly 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be profound, I said, sitting across from him. Just authentic. He nodded, then finally began to write. I didn't read over his shoulder, giving him privacy, for this difficult task. When he finished, he folded the note and slipped it into the package. Done, he said simply. Want to talk about it? He shook his head. Not yet. Maybe someday. But it's a start. The package was mailed the next morning. Whether Ryan would appreciate the gesture, whether it would reach something human still living within him, we couldn't know. But for our family, especially for Sarah and Mark, it represented a small step toward reclaiming agency in a story that had spun so violently out of control. Life settled into new patterns. The renovations to the house continued, not just the guest room, but other spaces too, as if we were physically rebuilding our sense of security, room by room. Mark's mother visited weekly, her relationship with her son gradually healing through patient conversations and shared care of the grandchildren. Greg, too, found his place in our reconstructed family, his law enforcement background ironically making him especially good at setting clear, healthy boundaries. 6 months to the day after Ryan first arrived at our doorstep, I found myself alone in the house for a rare afternoon. Mark was at work, the children at school activities. I walked through the rooms, touching furniture, looking at family photos, feeling the solidity of walls that had witnessed so much upheaval. In Sarah's art studio, the transformed guest room, I sat on the window seat we'd built during the renovation. Sunlight poured through the glass, warming the space that had once felt so contaminated by deception. Now it held easels and paintbrushes, clay sculptures drying on shelves, a child's joyful creativity reclaiming what had been tainted. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Package from Federal Correctional Institution, in today's mail, waiting to open it until you're home. A reply from Ryan. I hadn't expected that, had, in fact, prepared Sarah for the likelihood that her gift might go unacknowledged. My heart beat faster as I texted back, I'll be home in an hour. When the family gathered that evening, the package sat unopened on the coffee table. Sarah stared at it with wide eyes, Daniel with suspicious caution, Mark with unreadable restraint. Should we open it? I asked, letting the family decide collectively. Sarah nodded eagerly. Daniel shrugged with forced nonchalance that didn't hide his curiosity. Mark took a deep breath and picked up the package. Together, he said. Inside was a sketchbook, not the one we had sent, but a similar one, clearly purchased from the prison commissary. Mark opened it carefully to reveal detailed pencil drawings, each one labeled with a date spanning the past month. The first pages showed prison scenes, a cell, a common area, a fence with guard towers. Stark, precise, unembellished. Then came faces, other inmates, guards, a prison counselor. The skill was evident. Ryan had always been talented at drawing, another family trait he shared with Sarah. But it was the final drawings that caught our collective breath. There, rendered with painful care, were portraits of each of us. Sarah laughing, her face tilted up. Daniel concentrating on a soccer ball. Me reading in the window seat, Mark in his doctor's coat. Even one of Linda and Greg, based clearly on an old photograph. On the last page was a letter, written in the careful penmanship I recognized from the notes Ryan used to leave on our fridge during his stay. Mark, Emma, Daniel, and Sarah, thank you for the colors. I didn't deserve them, but they've brought something back to me that I thought was lost. I won't waste your time with apologies that can't possibly be adequate. What I did to your family is unforgivable. But the fact that Sarah thought to send me these pencils, that Mark was willing to write the note that accompanied them, it means more than I can express. Prison gives you a lot of time to think. To remember who you were before everything went wrong. I've been trying to draw those memories, not to escape responsibility, but to remind myself that there was goodness once, and maybe there could be again. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect to be welcomed back into your lives when I finally leave this place. But I wanted you to know that your small act of kindness reached me. That Sarah was right about colors helping someone be sorry faster. I am sorry, more deeply than I have words to express. And I will spend however many years it takes trying to become someone worthy of having once been part of your family. With regret and gratitude, Ryan. Silence fell as Mark finished reading the letter aloud. Sarah was the first to speak, her young voice quiet but certain. He used the green, for the trees outside our house. Indeed, the portrait of our home, the last drawing in the book, showed the maple tree in our front yard in delicate shades of spring green, exactly as it had looked. When Ryan first arrived 6 months ago, Daniel, studying the drawing of himself, said grudgingly, "He got my hair right, the way it sticks up in the back." Mark closed the sketchbook carefully, his expression thoughtful. "What do you think, Emma?" I considered the question, aware that my answer would help shape how our family processed this unexpected gesture. "I think," I said slowly, "that healing isn't linear. For Ryan, or for us, I think this is one step on a very long road." Mark nodded. "Well said." He turned to the children. "We can appreciate the drawings without forgetting what happened. We can acknowledge Ryan's regret without erasing the harm he caused. That's part of growing up. Learning that people and situations are complicated." Sarah leaned against her father. "Can we write back? Send more colors?" Mark met my eyes over our daughter's head, a silent communication passing between us. "Yes," he said finally, "we can write back. Not promises of easy forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Human to human." As the children went upstairs to select which new colored pencils to send, Mark and I remained on the couch, the sketchbook between us. "Do you think he's sincere?" I asked, quietly. Mark considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had always drawn me to him. "I think he's trying to be. Whether he can sustain it over 15 years of incarceration, whether he can truly change the patterns of a lifetime, that remains to be seen. And us? How do we move forward from here?" He reached for my hand, his fingers warm and familiar against mine. "One day at a time, setting boundaries while leaving room for possibility, protecting our family while allowing for growth." "That sounds right," I agreed. "No rush, no pressure. Just open doors where they feel safe to open." Later, as we prepared for bed, Mark paused by the window that overlooked our backyard. 6 months, he said, almost to himself. 6 months ago, I thought I was just helping my brother through a rough patch. I joined him at the window. And instead, we uncovered decades of secrets, brought down a criminal organization, and had to completely reimagine your family history. He smiled wryly. "When you put it that way." "The question is," I said, turning him gently to face me, "what do the next 6 months hold, and the 6 after that?" "I don't know," Mark admitted. "But whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's the one thing I'm certain of after all this." As we turned away from the window, leaving the darkness outside, I thought about Ryan's drawings, the careful attention to detail, the effort to capture something true about each of us. Perhaps that was the beginning of real change, seeing others clearly as they actually are, rather than as projections of one's own needs and fears. My brother-in-law had moved in just for a week and stayed for 6 months. What we'd found in his room had left my husband speechless, had endangered our family, had exposed generations of painful secrets. But standing here now, in our home, reclaimed and renovated, surrounded by a family wounded but healing, I recognized an unexpected truth. Sometimes it's only by facing our deepest fears that we find our greatest strength. Outside, the night was quiet. Inside, a family slept in peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new sorrows, but whatever came, we would meet it together, eyes open, hearts resilient. That, after all, was the true meaning of family. Not the one we're born into, but the one we choose to build. Day by day, with courage and care and unflinching honesty. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.